So we have the Ask ZBrush segments here that Mr. Drust is putting up on a weekly basis. So you definitely want to come here because he's usually averaging like 2 or 3 videos. Sometimes he puts 5 videos up here. And it's about reaching out to you and asking a question. So you can use our Twitter feed, hashtag AskZBrush, and we're monitoring those and answering the questions as they come through. There's well over 100 of those videos now there. So this is another great location for you to learn about ZBrush, see what people are doing. Then obviously we have our past ZBrush summits here as well. So if you've never been to the ZBrush Summer or tuned in for that, you're going to want to go back and you can look through 2016, 2015, and 2014 because we've had 3 ZBrush summits and we're starting to work on number 4 for 2017. We're very excited about that. And for those that are new, Mr. Drust and I, throughout this, we're going to be going back often to our ZBrush Central page. So this is where a lot of artists share their work. They share tips. You can get inspired. So, for example, you know, we just had the Overwatch people share all their pieces here. So this is a great location for us to look at what people have been doing. So you can see some great works here about the Overwatch crew. They dumped like all the work from Overwatch. So this is an amazing thread. So again, I just wanted to share ZBrush Central, of course, in here. So you guys have that as well. So it's, again, another place. It's really, this is about discovery, connecting, inspiring. So the ZBrush Live goal here is to have everybody come to one location, learn a lot of information, reach out to each other, learn things, and then we have a ton of amazing artists already signed up to stream through the Twitch channel as well. So we have a lot of upcoming artists. We have even Lana today. Drust is going to show some of their work so you guys can see this week. And as you can see also, if you look at the schedule on the Twitch channel, you can see that as well. You can see who's coming up today and the rest of the week. So we're continually looking for artists that want to join us and streaming out through Twitch and being a part of the Twitch section of our ZBrush Live page. So if you are interested, you definitely want to reach out to us for that. I also want to make sure we look at, again, also pixelogic.com. There's another location here that I want to share with everybody. So throughout here, you can get help. But what's great in here, we have a download center that some people might not know about. So this is a spot where we've gotten even more artists sharing particular matcaps or alphas or textures. This is also where you find out information about our plugins that we have. So one of the new plugins is 3D Print Hub. That has actually replaced our older plugin called 3D Print Exporter. So I want to touch base on that so everyone knows that there is a new plugin and it's been updated. So this is a great location as well to get information. You can obviously learn ZBrush here. So this is another spot where we have free videos. So there's hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of videos here. You can even create your own login, have your own channel in essence. You can sort videos by beginner, intermediate, and advanced. You can search for videos, but we've also blocked them off into certain sections. So obviously there's the full ZBrush 407 and there's ZBrush Core. So I just wanted to make sure, because obviously the viewership that we have here on the Twitch channel already, thank you for tuning in for the first one. We want to make sure that everybody that's watching maybe have never seen ZBrush, have heard of ZBrush, also knows about the application and locations that you can go and do. So like I said, I have Mr. Joseph Drust here with me. So I'm going to hand it off to him so he can show you guys some of the work as well that's been going on within the community. And we're going to get into ZBrush, and myself and him will be sculpting today in ZBrush. So I'm just going to give Mr. Drust the screen here.
And as Paul said, I usually try to get at least 2 out a week for those. And if you want to ask a question, just go to Twitter and use the hashtag AskZBrush, and you can ask away on those items. And I think there should be a schedule here. ZBrush Central, it's definitely a good place to hit up and get inspiration, get inspired, and see the works that people are creating. So here are some of hers that she's been working on. Also this week we'll have artists such as Michael Pavlovich who will be there, and here's some of his stuff that he's been working on. So really outstanding modelers and artists that are going to be doing our channels. So if you definitely want to partake in this, definitely hit us up, and we can get you a slot and you can stream right here. Some more people that are showing up. We have Ashley Adams, and she does this kind of stuff here, so really nice stuff as well. So she'll be contributing to our stream. Then next we have Danny Mack, who's another excellent ZBrush artist, and his stuff on ZBrush Central here, he has a bunch of speed sculpts. So you can come and watch these, and then if you show up for the CM stream on the channel, you can ask him questions and kind of, you know, pick his brain on how he creates these work of arts. And then as a counterpart to the I Has Toys collection here, we have John Troy Nichols as well, and he's going to show up and do some stuff too. So another really tremendous ZBrush artist that's taking his stuff, you know, printing it out and selling them as toys. So these are incredible models too. There's a lot of eye candy in all of these. We also have Matt Thorup, and he's another really excellent ZBrush artist doing a lot of tutorials and training on his own. So we're happy to have him on the channel as well. And finally we have Brendan Isaiah, and I'm going to totally massacre your last name here. I know you're in the chat, so Bengston. So feel free to yell at me next time you see me, Brendan, and we'll we'll get that last name sorted out. So another tremendous artist, and a lot of information and stuff that you guys can be able to pick from and hopefully inspire and use in your own art as you like strive to create stuff inside of ZBrush. And just once again, the ZBrush Live page will be the hub for all this. So if you just go to zbrushlive.com or go to pixelogic.com/ZBrushLive, you'll be able to get all that information there. So for today, me and Paul are going to kind of explain what ZBrush is, because we don't know how many of you are avid ZBrush users. So we're going to break down some of the basics. So hopefully not a lot of really technical stuff, but more just showing kind of the stuff you can do with the tool. We are a digital sculpting application, and so what that means, we try to bridge the traditional aspects of working with clay into the digital format. So we have the benefits of having symmetry, having undos, and different things like that to help speed up your process, yet still trying to strive to give that tactile feature or tactile nature that you'd have when working with a clay model. So I'm just going to go through and just demo a quick helmet here. You just come sculpting with this and talk through what Dynamesh is and things like that. So to start off, our tool is used in a wide range of things. One thing it's used with is scan data. So here I have a quick scan of my head here, and this was done by a company called 3D Scan LA out in LA. And they provide me the scan, and I've taken it and brought it into ZBrush. There's no cleanup on this really. It has a texture that came with it. And I took this model and I've used it as the basis of sizing stuff for creating helmets. So I do a lot of 3D printing and a lot of random kind of traditional mixed with digital kind of artwork. So I've taken this model and I've used it as a base to kind of come through and just kind of quickly generate shapes and forms inside of ZBrush here. So I've taken the head and I've just kind of morphed it into a very low resolution version of itself. So just basically describing the silhouette of the form here. Now for this I used ZRemesher, which is another powerful tool inside of ZBrush here that I'll hit on here in a minute. And this will allow you to remesh your objects. So this model was extremely dense after I pushed and pulled the faces, and then I ran it through this process that basically generated new topology for it. So this allows me to work at a lower subdivision and divide up and start describing some forms. So I'm going to use a creative process I like doing with this kind of stuff to start flushing out the shapes of these helmets. An example of a helmet is up here in the left corner here, and so you can see I like pulling out different shapes and kind of having them overlap and work on those transition elements as I make these things. So for this I just have this model here that's basically got pretty even topology, and I'm just going to go through and I'm going to start splitting this up into different groups, and this is going to allow me to establish kind of random forms, and then I can describe those forms in larger venues or avenues. So I'm just going to turn off perspective here and I'm going to come right to the side, and I know that my helmet's going to have a cutoff around the neck. So I want to come through and just describe a slice line through this area here that's going to describe the breakup between these. And for this, I use either slice curve, is usually the one I end up using quite a bit for this, or I'll just use masking with the lasso. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and this is going to allow me to get my selection brush. By default, this will allow you to hide and show visibility on your model. And you can do this by just holding Control and Shift, coming across the surface, and clicking and releasing, and that will show. If you drag it out and hold Alt, it'll do a hide, and so you can come through and swipe or switch between those two methods to kind of change visibility on your model as you work. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and I'm going to select the slice brush now, and this will just replace the current brush I have with the select rectangle. So I'm going to go with the slice curve brush here. Actually, we're going to do a masking one for this. We're going to go mask pen, and I'm going to do a mask lasso instead, because I can show you another workflow here. So I'm just going to start masking out some areas on the mesh here. So I have this kind of neck area described here. I'm going to mute Paul as well here, if he allows me. And once I have this kind of area masked out, I can come through and I can establish a new polygroup to this masked area. And what this polygroup is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to set up groups on my model so I can change the visibility really quick. So with this part masked out, I'm going to hit Control plus W, and if I turn my polyframes on, you'll see that I now have a new polygroup established on that area there. And so now I can isolate this part by holding Control and Shift and clicking, and that's going to remove that part below the neck. So now I'm just left with that kind of upper helmet shape. Now from here, I want to delete that neck area because I'm not really going to use it. So I'm going to come to the Geometry tab. I'm going to open up Modify Topology, and I'm going to do Delete Hidden. And this is now going to remove those polygons that were on my mesh. So I'm just left with this part. And now with this part visible, I'm going to scroll back up, and I can just turn on my head mesh there, and you can see the interaction now between those two subtools. So I have the bottom part that's starting my base shape for this helmet, and then I have the scan data, which is now visible now. So I can see these two working together. Now for creating helmet designs, the things I normally do is I try to not think of it as a helmet. I try to think of it as random shapes or things like that, and try to get more of a sporadic approach rather than I know I need this to be exact. And this just allows me some more happy accident creative aspects as I'm working on the model. So I'm going to use the same process I was doing with the masking, but now I'm just going to mask out different areas, give them a new polygroup, and then hide them. So for this helmet, I'm going to do something with kind of like an exposed face. I want a circular element in the face here. So I'm going to rotate the side, and I'm just going to draw out that masking lasso again to give me something like this. And as you can see, it's giving me this circle mask. Now I can hit that Control W again, and that's going to give me a new polygroup to that area. Now I can hold Control and Shift and click that part, and then click it again, and now I'm going to be left with this part of the helmet. So I'm just going to go through now and just mask these different parts out, give them a new polygroup, and then hide that polygroup until I have no more parts of the helmet left. And so just coming through and start describing these areas. So I'm going to mask out a mandible type area here. So something like that. Control W to give it a new polygroup, and then Control and Shift plus click to hide it. I'm going to do the same thing again. Control W, Control Shift click to hide it. Same thing again. And for this part, I'm just looking at kind of interesting or different forms on the mesh here that I can interweave or interlap. I like doing like round dome parts too, so bringing out something like this and then maybe subtracting it so I have two parts of a shell. Maybe it's a little bit too much. I'll come through on the side and just clear some of that masking out. So maybe a shape like that. Control W and then hide it. And then come back and we'll get this ear area here. And maybe do something like that. Control W, hide it. And then we'll take this chunk, Control W, hide it, and then we'll split this as well. Well, maybe not. And one thing nice about ZBrush is that you can do things like this and just kind of be creative on your workflows. You don't really have to have a full idea fleshed out in your head. It allows you to explore your concepts in 3D, which is really nice. So I'm going to get that there. And so now I should have all these chunks split up. So I'm just going to hold Control and Shift and click off, and you'll see now I have this rainbow effect of the entire helmet here. Now, after I have all these polygroups established, I can use a process inside of ZBrush that's called panel loops, and it will go through and it's going to take all these panels here, and it's going to give me thickness to them. It can apply some bevels, and this just allows me to break this quick breakup I did of the mesh into multiple parts. So I'm going to go to the Geometry tab here, and I'm going to open up the Edge Loop area, and in here there's this Panel Loops button. Now, if you run this without changing any settings, you're going to end up with something like this. And if I turn my polyframe off here, so you can see it's gone through, and everywhere that polygroup breakup was coming together and making a transition, it's given me another group. So this would work pretty well if you want to do like cut lines and things like that on a mesh. You can come through and describe these with a really straight slice brush, and then when all those polygroup breakups are going to happen, you can then come through and hide or break out those different parts, and it gives you these nice clean lines. Well, I don't really want it this thin. I want it a little bit thicker. So I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to change my thickness. And for this, I usually just put it at 0.1, and then I'm going to decrease my elevation to 0. And what this is going to do, it's going to take those panel loops, and instead of elevating them out from the head like so, it's going to put them right in the middle. And this is going to allow me to get some embedding of the panel loop shapes across the surface here, so they're not all exploding 100% out from the surface, but they'll be 50% from this way and 50% inside. And now I'm going to click panel loops again. And so now I have this. Now this process right now is a little bit messy, but that's okay, because we can remesh these things, as I showed earlier with the head here, and we can get clean forms out of this. At this stage, we're still in our conceptual stage, so we're just still trying to find out what kind of forms we want inside of ZBrush. So I'm going to get the move brush, and I'm going to start moving some of these shapes here. And I'm going to come up here to the brush palette and just click this, and then I'm going to hit M to isolate by the letter M, and I'm just going to find the move brush here. And now with this, I can come through and get a large draw size and turn on symmetry by hitting X, and I could just start deforming my mesh. So this could start changing stuff into different things. But the problem right now is while I'm using this move brush, it's moving everything. And I kind of want it just to move certain parts. I don't want it to move everything. I want it to move maybe this polygroup or this polygroup, but not both of them at the same time. So if I undo my move brush here, I can now go to the brush palette up here, and I can go to the modifiers tab here, or the masking tab rather. And in here there is a mask by polygroup slider. And when you change this mask by polygroup slider, it's going to look at the masking on your model, the polygrouping on your model, and it's only going to move the polygroup that you select first. So if I use the move brush and I click on polygroup A and move, it's only going to move that first polygroup. So I'm going to change this to 100, so it gives me 100% of this effect. And now I'm going to come across my model, and I'm going to do that same move process again, except this time you'll notice that it's only going to be moving a polygroup, so it's not moving everything else. And if I turn on my polyframes here and turn off line, you can see these are all the polygroup breakups I have on the mesh here. So if I click on this one, it's going to allow me to move that. If I click on this one, it's going to allow me to move that. And so as you can see, I can now isolate these different parts of this and start manipulating this helmet. So I just come through now at this point, and I just start finding forms and different objects on this. Now I wanted that kind of circular eye as well, so I'm going to remove that totally. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift and click on that polygroup to find this part here. Now once this part's visible, I can now expand my visibility to the full geometry island. And you can do this by holding Control and Shift plus A. And this is going to come through, and it's going to take that polygroup you had selected, and then it's going to expand your visibility on that area based on the geometry island. So that press again was Control Shift plus A, and that's going to allow you to isolate an entire geometry island. And now I can invert my visibility, so I'm going to hold Control and Shift and just drag off on the canvas. And now you can see I have this effect happening. So now I can delete that part I don't want hidden anymore. So I come down here and do a delete hidden, and now that is removed. And now I come through and I can start playing with these polygroups here to start describing different forms. And this is a really nice way that I like describing helmet designs. It's just very kind of fluid, and you just come through and start manipulating different aspects pretty quickly. And if you don't like something, you can always change it or remove it. But at this point, we're just trying to get some kind of interesting design on the mesh here. And you can overlap these parts, kind of feed them into each other. Now this isn't going to be your final model. This is still your exploration stage. So you can come through and just play with these. And if you guys have any questions when I'm doing this stuff too, we are monitoring the Twitch chat as well, so you can definitely ask things. And Paul should be around, if he's still there. He was trying to get our audio stuff fixed, so it's not totally crazy for you guys. And Paul says he is here. He's very low. All right, so I'm just going to mangle this a little bit more here. Now you can play with this as long as you like, but for a demo here, I mean, I could spend a few hours just manipulating shapes, but I don't really want to do that to you guys. So these kind of shapes a little bit flushed out a little bit more here. So we're going to leave this like that. So you have your base shapes kind of flushed out. Now some of these still need to change. And so at this point we were just trying to describe different things, maybe get an idea, maybe getting something that's kind of unique looking on the helmet here. So it's not your standard atypical helmet. So just playing with the different forms until you find something that may be a little bit appealing. Now after I have my model like this, it's a little bit messy. So we're not looking at a very clean type thing here. We have all these polygroups. You can see I have some stretching at the top here. So we're going to go through now, and I'm just going to take all these geometry islands. I'm going to break them up into chunks of themselves. And to do this, I'm going to go to the tool palette over here. I'm going to go down to the bottom here to the polygroups tab, and I'm just going to do a auto groups. And this is now going to take all those different geometry islands, and it's going to be a new polygroup for each of them. So instead of having that panel loop type effect where I had the edges being a different polygroup and the front face being a different polygroup and the back face being a different polygroup, they're now one single polygroup chunks. So if I hold Control and Shift and click on these, you can see I'm going to get that whole chunk isolated, and I can go through and get all these. Now I want to work with this helmet with a little bit of symmetry right now. So I have this part on the side here is being a different polygroup than this part. So I'm going to apply just a mirror and weld on this quick, and this will come through and just align those polygroups so they're the same. So now I have both these guys together, both of these guys together, and then anything that I have split down the center, they're now linked. So now that I have these grouped out at this stage, I now want to split these off into their own subtool. And this is going to allow me to further refine these. We can use Dynamesh, we can use ZRemesher, and it just allows me to break the design up into different chunks that I can now change the visibility of to manipulate in a more isolated fashion. So with this selected here, I'm going to go to split, and I'm going to do a group split on this. And this is now going to look at all those polygroups and split those out. And so you can see I now have new subtools generated for each of those. And if I come through and activate these, you can see these are all the different parts of that helmet there. So all those different breaked out areas. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to look at all these kind of individually. And what I'm looking for is distorted geometry that I may have stretched or pulled too much. So you can see on this one here, I have some overlapping parts here. So I'm just going to come through and smooth some of these guys out with the smooth brush here. And you may have to do some inflates on this. And this is just going to help the Dynamesh process here, or the ZRemesher process. And this is just me going a little bit too crazy with the models here. So I'm just coming through and cleaning up that. And I'm just going to go through all these guys and just look at them really quick and smooth out some different stuff. They're not really harming my forms or shapes at this moment, so I'm going to do a lot of more polishing on these items. This is just a quick start here on these. So that's pretty good. This next one. And usually smoothing is the solution for a lot of this. And if it's thick, it's pretty good. You just don't want it to be too thin in terms of your geometry. And if you guys ever run across a thing like this where I have this part and I want to smooth it and it's really not smoothing very fast, you can hold down Shift, and while you're smoothing you can release Shift, and this will do a polish smooth. So that process again is hold down Shift to smooth, release Shift, and now you're going to get a polish smooth, and that's going to allow you to smooth out any kind of pole geometry you may have, where you have a whole bunch of edges converging on one single point. So you can come through and smooth out geometry, things like that. This one will come through and just smooth that part out. So I'm almost done with these. And should have probably done a little bit less of the parts here. Went a little crazy with helmet parts. Got quite a few of them. And there we go. All right. So now they have these all broken up. Now I'm going to come through and I'm just going to do some ZRemesher stuff on these to kind of even the topology. And I'm going to do a mixture of ZRemesher and also Dynamesh. And this is going to allow me to get that sculptable surface out of these quick panel loops that I made on the model. So I'm just going to come through and pick one of these guys. So we'll pick this front face here. And with this, I'm going to come through and I'm just going to go to the Geometry tab here. And I'm going to do a ZRemesher for this one. And so the ZRemesher will go through and it's going to look at the topology on your model and the shape of your mesh, and it's going to generate new topology from that. So if I come over here and click ZRemesher, by default it's going to give me a new mesh that's going to be around 15,000 polygons. So it's coming through and getting that model up, and you can see I have 30,000 points, so I'm right at that 15,000 polygons pretty much. And now I have a new ZRemeshed version of my model. Now if this is too dense for your liking, you can change this slider over here as well. So 15 might be a little bit too much. We're going to go to 5 and do ZRemesher. And with a simple click, you can change this, change the resolution, and reprocess, and you're going to get another version of that topology for your mesh. And so now that I have some of this clean geometry here, I can now come through and start sculpting on this a little bit better. So I can use any of our sculpting brushes, and there's hotkeys for all our brush systems, and these can be accessed by hitting B on your keyboard, and then you can isolate by a letter. So I'm looking for the clay buildup brush, so I'd hit B and then C. And then as you can see, the third letter for the clay buildup brush would be B. So BCB would allow me to get the clay buildup brush. If I want to get the standard brush, I can hit BST, and that would allow me to get the standard brush. So built-in hotkey system that automatically looks at the brushes you have installed and then automatically correlates a 3-button press for each of those brushes. So now I'm just going to go through and do some sculpting on this with the ZRemeshed version of the model here. I use a lot of clay buildup and also H-polish to sculpt these things out. So I'm going to go and switch back to that clay buildup brush. I'm going to bring everything back here. And I like some of these little errors I got on the thing there, so some happy accident type stuff. And I'm just going through and sculpting on this. Now you can use ZRemesher or Dynamesh for this. They both have kind of different approaches you can do with them. For the ZRemeshed version here, it's definitely going to adhere the topology based on your sculpting details, and it's not going to give you a completely even mesh. So if you come through and find things not sculpting exactly how you want them to sculpt, you may want to go and switch to Dynamesh for the time being. I use H-polish quite a bit to come through and polish out surfaces as well. And as you can see, this is very close to just kind of using clay at this point. So just pushing in on surfaces to carve in different areas. You can change your brush sizes and how those brushes will handle on these surfaces here. And this will allow me to come through and just start polishing these surfaces out. And the process for these kind of helmet designs usually take me anywhere from an hour to 2 hours usually to just get to a level where I'm happy with. So I'm just coming in and using these brushes here, switching between them. Like that. And I'm just going to go through and kind of do that same thing to all these guys. You also have some polish options you can use in the deformation palette as well, so these will take some of these areas out. If I still have those polygroups on the model here, I could use the polish by groups or polish by features here to polish these, and you can come through and use these as well to help soften areas of your geometry a little bit quickly, or faster than you might be able to do manually. This one I'm going to turn into a Dynamesh, so I'm going to go to the Geometry tab here and I'm going to activate Dynamesh. Dynamesh inside of ZBrush is ZBrush's digital clay, and this is going to look at your mesh and it's going to retopologize everything evenly into a quadded surface, and then that's going to allow you to sculpt. So if I come through here and set this to say a resolution of 256, I'm going to turn off blur and then activate Dynamesh. After my mask is cleared here, you're going to see that my surface topology has changed. This is the new topology, and this is what it was. And so now I have a more even surface, which I can come through and sculpt on. So now I can use the shift brushes and come through and modify this and switch back to those H-polish brushes and start pulling out some of these forms here. So just playing with the shape some more at this point. Pushing these in. Maybe I don't want it to overlap that area of the helmet here. You can also use the move brush as well to tailor this stuff even more. Just add more intricate designs or shapes here. And at this point it still feels a lot like playing. I'm just playing with the clay, looking for different shapes and designs, smoothing things out if it gets a little bit too rough, and come in and carve different shapes here into with the clay buildup brush as well. If I can select it correctly. So maybe add some sort of cut here. And then just come through and I build up the surface to make it a little bit even. And then smooth those out. And then follow up with some more H-polish to refine a little bit of a hard edge in these areas here. And when I start using H-polish, I start getting into this very kind of lulled voice. It's very relaxing. It's like the Bob Ross Happy Trees, except it's Happy Clay Brush, or Happy H-polish rather. You'll see my voice is totally getting like low when I start using this. I think there's something that switches in my brain. If you ever need to go to sleep, you can come, and if I'm on this channel, I'll do some H-polish for you guys and you can just zone out. Bedtime H-polish. I'm going to play with this shape some and do the same thing. I'm going to Dynamesh this guy here after I clear my mask. And we'll polish this one again too. There's another interesting thing that Dynamesh has that may be of use. So in here you can do that polish effect, which I just did down here, but there's also a process here that you can turn on with Dynamesh, and this is going to allow you to polish the surface as you Dynamesh. So enabling this, if you have a really low resolution Dynamesh, you can come through and sculpt on it. So if I get something like this, and now if I just hold Control and drag off to re-Dynamesh, you're going to see it's going to take that result of the stroke I just did, and it's going to apply this polish and the Dynamesh at the same time. So this will allow you to come through and use Dynamesh on pretty low models here to get a surface, and then as you Dynamesh, it's going to start giving you these hard polished shapes. So this is a big help, especially if you're doing any sort of stylized characters and things like that, and you want certain aspects to remain kind of hard, or like keep a hard edge to it. You can come through and start doing this, and then as you re-Dynamesh, it's going to apply that polish on top of it. So this is a handy little thing inside of ZBrush here. Most people I don't think use. They always want to keep their detail exactly how it was with Dynamesh. But if you're just doing like a conceptual type thing, it actually gives you some nice results that you can then play on. So I come through and now harden this stuff out. H-polish this as well. And now when I re-Dynamesh, you can see it's going to harden up some of those edges a little bit more. But this is part of the processes of ZBrush that I really like, is this aspect. The creative outlet you can use. It's not like you're doing anything technical in my usage of it. I feel that I'm actually traditionally sculpting, coming through and describing forms and just being artistic rather than worrying about polygon counts and edges being turned, vertices and all that stuff. And it's very freeing to come through and just start finding shapes and forms. And my brain usually works a little bit better in 3D than it does in 2D too. So just playing on the different shapes as I work on this. I'm going to turn that polish back on for this one too. So now I can see in a few simple clicks I've got this nice kind of shape roughed out. Now I can pull these into the other surfaces, playing with the transitional aspects of this to get that kind of overlapping feel. Do a lot of these slight nudging. So using the move brush and just nudging a little bit, and this will also help with those transition areas. I'm going to take this shape now and do that same thing. And I'm going to turn on that polish too, so it gets that nice result. I'm going to come in and smooth this back part out. Smooth this out some. And ZBrush has a lot of different things built into it, so if you want to do your helmets in this sculptural way, you can definitely do it this way. There's also a whole polygonal modeling toolset called the ZModeler brush, and that will allow you to refine your shapes in a more polygonal method, so using low resolution versions of your meshes, and then coming in and adding creasing and different elements on those to describe your forms. So you're not just locked into one workflow inside of ZBrush. There's a wide range of venues or avenues you can use. And it also sometimes helps to break a creative flow by switching into another process or another method. So if you keep getting the same results, you can try switching it up and using maybe more ZModeler than clay buildup. And the back of this helmet is looking a little bit wonky here, so we're going to do some drastic changes here. Another thing I like doing is I'll take a alpha brush and I'll scrub it across the surfaces of my model. So let me Dynamesh this quick, and we'll turn on that polish and smooth this out. Got some crazy Viking type thing going on here. So I'm just going to make a alpha really quick inside of ZBrush here, and this is going to allow me to just kind of drag it off on the surface of my model. So I'm just going to come up here and I'm just going to save this guy. And now I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to grab a cube and bring that in like so. And I'm just going to rotate it. So grabbing the transpose line here after I make it a polymesh here. And just drag this out, and I'm going to hit the white circle, and the white circle will center the geometry directly in the middle of the mesh. So you can see if I turn perspective off, it's right in the center here. And now I'm just going to rotate this slightly here. Well, if I can get it to rotate for me. Let's try it one more time here. And I just want to rotate it at that angle, so just enough where I now have a cube that looks like this. So it has just taken the box and just tilted it some. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to generate an alpha looking down like so onto the mesh here. So I'm going to come up to the top here, and I'm just going to zoom this out a little bit, and I'm going to get out of edit mode, and this is going to put me in 2.5D mode here. And I'm going to come over here to the tool palette, and I'm going to grab the MRGB Z grabber right here. Just grab that guy. And I'm just going to draw this out. I'm going to hold down Shift to lock it to a cube. And I'm going to use spacebar to move this around, and I'm going to get it to about there. And now I'm going to release. And on release, you can see that I've now created an alpha map from that rotated cube. And so what I'm going to do with this alpha map now is I'm going to go back to my helmet here, redraw it out, go into edit mode, and I'm going to hit Control N to clear my canvas. Is now I'm going to come through on these shapes here, and I'm going to use this alpha as a overlay kind of sculptural drag, I guess you could call it. So I'm going to switch to the standard brush, and I'm going to make sure Z adds on. I'm going to change my stroke to drag rectangle. I'm going to change my alpha to that one I just created right here, and I'm going to make sure lazy mouse is off. So I'm going to stroke area here, go to lazy mouse, and I'm just going to disable lazy mouse. And then I'm going to come across my model, and wherever I drag this out, you're going to see it's going to start distorting my shape. And since I generated with this harsh line through the center, I'm going to get this nice kind of point that's going to be generated. So I'll take my mesh at this stage and I'll start dragging this alpha across the surface here. And this is going to distort the mesh. And as you're doing this distort, you may see different shapes that may be of use. So I can come through and drag this out like this, and now I'm getting kind of this nice harsh line on that, and I can use move transpose line to now manipulate this a little bit further into the thing here. Let me turn that off there. And so you can see, as using just this alpha stroke here, it's going to allow me to just add another layer of detail onto my helmet here. And you can adjust how this gets tapered off by using your Z intensity. You can also apply a blur to it. So if you go to the alpha and you go to modify, there's a radial fade. You can apply this as well. Usually a value of 5 usually works pretty good. And now I can come through and start manipulating my shapes and just experimenting to see if there's anything I kind of like out of this. So another creative way to kind of manipulate these different parts. And I do a lot of this on my meshes. It also gives you kind of lines to follow. So if you like certain things or you find shapes, you can just build off of those. So I'm just going to come through and do this a little bit to these structures here. You can hear Paul talking in the background. So now with just a little bit more of this here, I now have a little more interesting shapes going on with the helmet rather than what it was looking a few seconds ago. Move those down. I'm going to reposition those too. So switch back to the move brush here, and I'm just going to manipulate these. Just pulling these shapes in. We need some kind of ear protection there, so I'm going to do that, and then move these transition areas up. Move these guys in a little bit and back. And then maybe grab these and just lower that down a little. That bubble effect kind of happening there. Fix this back part as well. And then maybe pulling these cheeks some too. To switch between subtools, what I'm doing here is I'm just holding down Alt and clicking. So if you hold down Alt and click, it's going to automatically jump to the subtool that you have underneath your cursor. So this will allow me to come through and just quickly move between these different shapes and find these areas. And we're going to turn the polish on this guy too. So I'm going to go to the Geometry tab, go back to Dynamesh, Dynamesh that facial part to 256, make sure polish is on. And now we should get that. Now we have a little bit cleaner stroke there. Now I'm going to come in with H polish and kind of flesh these out. And we'll come back later and revisit that little seam area there. Polish them out for right now. There you go, back into H polish voice. Never fails. Never fails. Paul, I can hear you. All right, so that's just a quick kind of breakdown of using just ZBrush's processes, some panel loops and Dynamesh, and just some sculpting to get some different stuff. Now, the next thing I want to do with this guy is I want to make some circular elements, maybe to put right here, so some kind of ear cups. Add maybe something here to add in. Now, ZBrush has a bunch of tools or brushes that have these different elements built into them, and they're called insert mesh brushes. So if I navigate up here to my brush palette and open this up, you see any of these brushes that are labeled IMM and then have a name after them are these things called insert mesh brushes. And these brushes contain a series of geometry that's embedded in each brush. And you can take this brush and drag different elements of these geometry to your model. So as an example of this, I'm going to come over here and just grab this IMM model kit brush. And if you press M on your keyboard, this is going to open up the insert mesh palette here that shows you all the parts that are contained in this brush. So this brush contains all these different parts. So what this means is I can come through and say select one of these guys. Let's grab this one here. This one is one of my favorites for using. And then now I can simply select the subtool. So I can select this guy here. And now if I click and drag, I'm going to be able to drag out that mesh onto my model. And this can be dragged anywhere. So you can come through and start just dragging these all over the place. And now you have this like other element of just kind of kit bashing inside of ZBrush here. So bringing back those other traditional methods of establishing model stuff. So you can take all these parts and now you have a helmet that's now got all these things all over it. So very free-flowing and kind of creative in this process. Well, I don't want this helmet to be too crazy, so I'm just going to isolate this one part here. And now that it is an unmasked portion of this other part of the helmet here, I can split this off by its masking onto a new subtool. So I'm going to go to the Geometry tab again, or Subtool tab. I'm going to go to Split, and I'm going to do a Split Unmasked Points. It's going to take the unmasked part of the mesh here, and it's going to split it out. So I'm just going to click that, and now I have the mandible again that's still on its own subtool, and now I have a new subtool with just that IMM part. Now with this IMM part isolated, I can now apply a dynamic smoothing property on this model. And this is going to take out some of the facetting you're seeing here on the mesh. It's going to make it look smooth, but it's not going to hurt the other part of my meshes that I may still be sculpting on. So to enable dynamic subdivision, you just go to the tool palette again, you go to the Geometry tab here, and I'm going to turn off Dynamesh quick for this tool, and I'm going to open up this dynamic subdivision tab here, and I'm just going to click dynamic, and that's going to turn it on. And as you can see, when I activated it, it's taken that model that looked like this, and it now looks smooth. So it's gone through and it's applying this dynamic subdivision on the mesh. Now this is the same effect that you would get if you came up here to divide and just kept clicking divide. So if you kept clicking the model to be divided up, it would give you the same visual result that you're having with that dynamic. The thing now is, though, that I have all this geometry directly on the model. So if I want to work on that low resolution version, I now have to come over here and scrub all the way down to the lowest subdivision, or maybe I want to modify some stuff. I'm not going to be able to work with it as fluid as if I had it just as that low polygonal mesh. So I'm going to undo that and get back to the non-subdivided version, and with dynamic on, now I can come through, and ZBrush still is considering it this low mesh, but it's just viewing it at that high resolution. So this is extremely helpful when working with these kind of IMM parts and different things with the ZModeler brush, because you can just grab really nice shapes out of it and still keep that underlying structure really low. So I'm going to come through and model another one quick now using the ZModeler process and also with this dynamic subdivision. And I'm just going to come to the top here, and I have some kind of these shapes that have already been established here. So I'm going to show you what some of the potential you have for using this ZModeler process is. So here's a mixture of different stuff here, and this is from a concept that was in a border break game, and so it's just a little device they had, and I just came through and just modeled this, and this is all broken into different tools and different parts, and it's all been modeled with the ZModeler toolkit. So if I turn on my polyframes here, you can see that it's still that low resolution geometry, and if I isolate this and turn off dynamic subdivision, you can see this is the part that I modeled, and then when I toggle that dynamic subdivision on, let's go in here and do this quick. You can see this is the result I am getting. So this was what I modeled, and then with some creasing and some other stuff inside ZBrush here, this is the result I get. So this allows you to just come through and model this low resolution version of your mesh and then apply the dynamic smoothing on top of it, and it gives you a nice clean result. You can also do things in dynamics, such as this process called QGrid. And so if I isolate this part here, this part has the QGrid effect applied, and what QGrid does is it goes through and it's going to apply this kind of nice smoothing or bevel effects to your entire surface. So if I turn off dynamic here, you can see this is what I modeled. So I've kept everything pretty angular. You can see my topology is just all over the place, and when I activate QGrid, it's going to come through and it's going to look at all the edges on your model, and it's going to apply edge loops basically to those areas. And this allows you to come through and establish this kind of nice smoothing on your surface there. And you can contribute different values here to get this different result. And this process mixed with the normal dynamic subdivision is very handy, because if you have a shape on your model that's extremely hard-edged and doesn't have any circular elements to it, you can quickly block that out very fast, and then you can apply this QGrid to it, and it's going to make all those beveled edges look really soft and nice. So then you can get results like this. So to use the ZModeler brush, you can basically just start with any polygonal model. So here I have a simple cube here, and with this active, you can come through here and I can just start adding this dynamic subdivision to it. And I can use the ZModeler brush in correlation with dynamic subdivision, so I'm working on the low resolution one, but I'm seeing the high resolution one. So if I just activate dynamic on this cube here, you can see this is what I'm going to get. So it's just your same kind of visual result you're going to have if you just divided this model up. Now if I turn on that Q grid, it's going to be looking at all those edges, and now I'm going to get something like this, right? So it's taking that box, and now I can control the beveled edges on this. I can change to a chamfer if I want, and now I've got a model that looks higher polygon than it actually is. And so now I come through and use the ZModeler brush on this, and as long as this dynamic and Q grid is still active, you're going to see the results update on the mesh in real time. So I'm going to keep my polyframes on here, and I'm now going to select the ZModeler brush, and this is the ZModeler polygon toolset here. So I'm going to hit B on my keyboard, I'm going to isolate by the letter Z, and I'm going to select M, which is going to give me the ZModeler brush. And now the ZModeler brush is context sensitive. So what this means is that if you hover over a polygon, an edge, or a vertice on your mesh, you're going to get a different action you can apply. So by default, the poly action is set to Q mesh. So what this means, I can come through here and I can just click and drag, and it's going to apply this kind of extrude action. Now this extrude action also performs a weld when it's doing it. So I can keep extruding things out like so, and then if I want to remove a shape, I can just come through and remove it. So it does this nice modeling kind of set where you can come through and remove an add, remove an add, remove an add, and you can do it very quickly. So I can hover over an edge, and this will give me a insert edge loop, and this allows me to just insert an edge. So I can come through and start describing more shapes with the insert edging and this Q mesh action here on a face, and you can see I can start modeling these different portions on my model pretty quick. And you can really start getting some interesting shapes out of these. Now the Q mesh action will also snap after you have them generated, so I can pull this out, and let's pull this guy out, and I can start dragging this surface to the other surface there, and you can see it will snap to that surface as well. So you can also bridge areas by just clicking and dragging on the surface of your model, and this will allow you to come through and fill in different holes. And then if you don't like that hole, you can undo, you can come through and remove parts. So it's a very interactive way of modeling on your surfaces. Now with this, as noted before, I still have that Q grid action active, so as you can see, this is the result I would be seeing on my model with Q grid. So I can come through and start manipulating my surfaces, adding some edge loops, maybe cutting some more in here, subtracting stuff out. And as you're doing this, you're still kind of can preview it at that high resolution. You can change how it's going to look. So it's very handy for coming through and making these interesting shapes very quickly with boxes. And Q grid works best on elements that don't really have any kind of roundness to them. So if you have an element in your model, you can break it up into the elements that are hard edged and then the elements that may have roundness. You can do normal dynamic for the rounded areas and then Q grid for the hard edge stuff. And this process can be taken extremely far. So here I have an entire drone here that we did for a webinar. And this one was all modeled in ZModeler. So all these parts here on the entire surface here, you can see they're all consist of that low resolution geometry that has some creasing applied and then that dynamic subdivision to get the result. As you can see, the possibilities are pretty much endless in what you can kind of create with this. And then with the dynamic subdivision, you can get it to preview at this very high resolution. I've also gone through and done a whole R2 unit using this process as well. I just come out and zoom out on this. So here we have an R2 here, and this was one of the projects that I always wanted to model and then never got around to it. And so finally with the ZModeler brush, I was able to just go through and do it to my liking. And so all these parts modeled the same way, so just using the tool set, and then I just have dynamic subdivision applied to generate the topology there. And as you can see, all these different parts have that on it. Now for his core element here, I think Paul will have some time where he's going to show you the surface noise properties. But this middle part here, you can see as I rotate him, he's kind of going to the lowest subdivision here. And this is because this cylindrical part here, I used a process inside of ZBrush called surface noise to achieve this. And so this is a texture map that I generated in ZBrush, and then I applied it to a cylinder, and then I used that map to displace that cylinder object, which gave me these details. But the entire shapes here that you see were all made with the ZModeler brush. So if I go and select this one, just frame this quick, you can see this is my build plate for R2's details. And if you come through and look at all these are all different ZModeler shapes. And you see some of these are using that Q grid option. So this is what I modeled. So we're talking about very low geometry, and then with that dynamic subdivision active with that Q grid, I'm now getting this nice kind of beveled face there. So you can come through and quickly model those shapes out and apply that different dynamic smoothing to get a different result. So I mapped out R2's entire feature set here as a flat version. Then I used that same process where I used the MRGB-Z grabber and grabbed the map and then applied it to a cylinder, and then that gave me the details that are on the R2 unit here. So it allowed me to, and I did the same thing for the dome. So all these other parts here are all Z-modeled out for all these areas. I should be able to show you some wireframes here. I have a lot of polygons in those two projected areas. I should be able to see all though. So you can see the wires there, and you can see all the different polygroups and just all the ZModeler geometry that was used just for R2. So no Dynamesh on him at all. It was all ZModeler. So interesting stuff there as well. And let's see here. So Paul, you can stop me at any time. If not, I'm just going to model some stuff. So I'm going to go through and just do some ZModeler here until Paul is ready to go. So here I just have a simple poly sphere here, and it has poles and caps on the sides. And I'm just going to go through and I'm going to cut some edges in and then do some extrusions. So this is all going to be using the ZModeler brush as well. So I'm going to make some sort of like camera iris thing here. So similar to what you saw in this version here. So this little device here. And I'm just going to do it with the ZModeler brush. So I'm going to come and grab him again. If I can find him again. I got distracted. Where's my sphere? There we go. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add the detail to this lens type iris thing here. And for this I'm going to add some edges in here, and then I'm also going to do some of that Q-mesh action along those different edges to kind of get that shape. So I'm going to first come through and just cut in some of these, and this is just hovering over an edge with the ZModeler brush and just simply clicking, and that's going to allow me to insert that edge there. And then I'm going to come through and I'm going to tag some of these surfaces, and to do this you can hold down Alt while you're using any of the poly actions, and this is going to give you a temporary polygroup to work with. So I can hold down Alt and click, and this is going to allow me to come through and tag all these areas here, and I can do these to both of these surfaces like so. And now this is given this temporary polygroup to that area. Now once this polygroup has been established on this area, I can now use a target inside the ZModeler brush. So if I hold down spacebar to open that back up, you can see my modeler action is set to Q-mesh, which is what I was the default one. And then I have the target set to the single poly. And the single poly is going to look at specifically the polygon you click on and perform the Q-mesh action to it. Now since I tagged multiple polygons with this white polygroup, wherever I click is going to affect the polygon I click on and also any area that has that white polygroup. So since this has all this white polygroup, I can come through and just simply click on one of these polys here and drag, and I'm going to get this effect. So it's going to take all those edges there and drag them out. Now I think I had a pull on this. I need a weld quick, so let me just come through here and do a weld. There we go. And then we're going to delete these creases. And now let's do that again. So there we go. So now I've added that aspect to my model there. So I've just taken that and extruded it out. And now I come through and start adding some different edges in here. So there's a few ways you can apply bevel areas to your surfaces. If you hover over an edge and press spacebar to go to the ZModeler Edge Action menu, in here you have a bevel you can select, and here you have a target of edge loop complete. And this will allow you to select an edge and it will apply the bevel across that entire edge loop. So I can come through and bevel these surfaces out to get something like that. Then I come through and say Q-mesh this inner part here, and then drop that in a little bit to make it like a camera iris there. I'm going to bevel that loop, just give it a little more taper there. And then I'm going to hover over this edge and do an insert this time with a single edge loop selected to just add another loop of geometry there. I'm going to do the same on this part here. And as you can see, as the more and more you use the ZModeler brush, it definitely becomes really intuitive and really easy to use. So you just need to remember which action is in which area, and as you toggle over a different part of your model, you can perform those different actions. Now, the ZModeler brush also works on polygrouping, and so the polygrouping is big because you can set targets to just work on a specific polygroup. So for this ring here, I want to take this entire ring and I want to grow it up. So I want to use that QMesh action on this entire ring. So I could come through and hold Alt and draw this all the way around, but that's going to take a little while to get all the way around the cylinder. I'd probably have to rotate my model and do some other aspects like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over this edge here, and I'm going to go back into the ZModeler Edge Action menu. And in here I'm going to select the Polygroup action. And with this Polygroup action selected, I have a target of a poly loop. And what this will allow me to do is I can just simply click, and if you hold Alt or press Alt while you're clicking, you can change the polygroup of that area. And this will allow you to come through and apply polygrouping to different areas of your mesh. So now I have a different polygroup here and a different polygroup here. So now I can hover over this poly and have that QMesh action selected. And now I can take this and change this to polygroup island. And what this is going to do, it's going to look at that polygroup, and as long as it's the geometry island and not connecting to another area that has the same polygroup, when I perform the QMesh action, it's going to perform it across that entire polygroup island. So as you can see, now I can perform this. So I can tuck it in or tuck it out and just change the shape of my mesh like so. Now I can come to this other polygroup that I made over here and do that same thing as well. And you can see I can start adding different details to my model. So I don't really want it on that part, so I'm just going to leave that where it is for now. And so now that I've got some of these forms kind of established, I want to activate that dynamic subdivision now so I can kind of see what this is going to look like in its smooth form. So I can come over here and just turn it on, and this is going to do a global smooth at the moment. So it's going to come across and smooth the entire model. So all those nice edges that I had have been kind of washed away. They're kind of get smoothed out. Well, I want to manipulate those, and I want to keep those harsh. So to do this, I'm going to apply some creasing. So I'm going to go back into my polyframes here, and I'm going to get out of dynamic. And I'm going to hover over an edge again, and this time when I press spacebar, I'm going to select the Crease action, which is over here, and just select that. And I'm going to set my target to edge loop complete. So now I have a brush that will allow me to come through, and when I click on an edge, and it's going to take this edge and the whole edge that completes that edge loop and crease it. So if I come through and click this edge now, you're going to see that I now have this double dotted line that's surrounding that edge. And what this double dotted line tells ZBrush is the next time I activate this dynamic subdivision over here, it's going to hold that edge. So you can see here it is with that crease, and I'm getting a nice sharp edge. If I hold Alt and click that edge again and remove the crease, you can see now I'm getting a soft edge. So you can use this crease option with the dynamic subdivision here to crease and uncrease different areas of your model. And this is going to allow you to keep areas hard and areas soft. So I can come through and start creasing these different elements here, and now I'm going to get this result on my mesh. So now I have these hard edges being established. And you can do this as much as you want. You can toggle them on and off, so you don't have to, lock yourself into one level of creasing. You can come through and crease, and then if you don't like it, you can go back and you can uncrease. And that'll allow you to get those kind of shapes out of there. Now I have this pole on the center here that's driving me nuts right now, so I'm just going to come through and mask this out. So I'm going to go back to my mask pen and get a mask rectangle. I'm going to draw a mask out on the side here, and then as I have it drawn out and hold spacebar, this is going to allow me to move the mask. So now I can come through and just place it right there on that center vertice. And now I can invert my mask by holding Control and clicking off. And now if I switch to my transpose line and drag it out, get out of perspective here, and now click this white circle, it's going to send that transpose line directly to that unmasked area. And now I can use the center circle here along with move, and I can reposition this like so. And I may also just switch to my move brush here and move it back a little bit as well. And now I can zoom out and clear my mask and go back onto dynamic. You can see I have a little bit less of that kind of thing happening there with that pole. And you can definitely manipulate your topology to change that too. If I change the way it capped, it would give me a different result as well. So now I have a little bit of a camera thing here. I want to add some roundness to this part too. So for this, I'm going to use a process of insert multi-edge loops. So I have been inserting a single edge loop with the ZModeler brush. So this is just single edge loop, clicking and dragging to add it. Along with just single edge loop adding, you can also add multi-edge loops. So if you hover over an edge and go back in here, you can set your target to multi-edge loops. And then down here you have some different variations and modifiers you can select from. One modifier I like is this interactive elevation one here. And I come through and grab that, and when you click on a face and drag, if you move your pen left and right, it's going to allow you to get elevation on that, and then up and down will allow you to get tessellation. So you can come through and change this. So now I can add that surface there, and then if I activate my dynamic there, I'm starting to get that shape there. So I think here in a few minutes I'm going to switch with Paul, and Paul's going to demo some stuff. Let me check this out here quick. I hope you guys aren't terribly, I haven't put you to sleep yet. So now I have this kind of cylindrical shape here. I'm going to come through and just add two more things, Paul, and then I'll let you have this. So I want to split some points to add some different variation here. So I'm going to hover over a point here. I'm going to go to split. And this is going to allow me to split a point, and it's going to generate the circular aspect of that point. And so with this, I can come through and split a few areas on my mesh here, so something like this. And after you have one drawn out, if you just simply click, it's going to split it the same way again. So you can come through and split multiple times. When you do the split, it will apply this nice creasing. So then I come through and Q mesh these guys, so tagging them with this white polygroup, and then dragging them in. And that's going to give me that result. Now if I activate dynamic subdivision, I now have something like this. So all sorts of stuff you can do with ZModeler. And if you guys keep following the Twitch channel here, I'm sure I'll be back using ZModeler quite a bit. So if you have any other questions in the future or any things you guys want to kind of see meshed out, this is one of the features inside ZBrush I absolutely love, and I use it all the time. So don't be hesitant. The next time me and Paul do this, I will probably there's a high possibility I'll be doing more ZModeler with the items. All right, Paul, are you ready? Are you there?
I am ready. Oh, yep, I'm ready. I'm here to take it from here. Everyone can hear me fine and see my screen all right. I want to touch base on things. Since the questions are coming through, I've been watching the questions, more questions about ZModeler and some other things. So I want to continue, might as well just continue this conversation a little bit more. So, and I want to touch base on this dragon that I made. So I, in essence, used a Remesh to make the scales, but I want to show a couple examples. So I'm going to go into Remesh and Nanomesh so we can look at various ways. And I'm actually going to cover one of Mr. Joseph Drust's little handy-dandy plugins that, again, is on ZBrush Central. So I'm going to be going back to ZBrush Central here. And if you go to the forum, okay, so you know where you can get this plugin that I'm going to touch base on. When we came out with a Remesh and Nanomesh, Drust made a very handy little plugin that I think is useful for many people. So I want to make sure people know that. So this is just with the main forum. And I'm going to go right in here to your ZBrush ZScript utilities. So I'm just showing this to you guys now. So if you want to download it right now, I'm going to be going into this. And then this is where a ton of people will do their own scripts, their own methods. It's a great location to get some really cool plugins. So I'm going to be using this one right here, the Nanotile textures. So I'm going to click on this. Mr. Drust made this. So this is a great plugin to create tileable textures, normal maps, height maps, AOs, albedo. So I'm going to cover the basics of this so everyone can get an understanding of this plugin, because I think it's extremely useful. I know a lot of people are asking, are we recording these? Yes, we're absolutely going to be recording these. They'll be put up for later viewing. Everything, again, the ZBrush Live, the launch day today is all about that page. So on ZBrush Live, you guys are going to be able to go to the page here, and anybody that's streaming or showing anything on our Twitch channel or anything in our podcasts, the Z Plays, where we're going to be playing with various studios, their games, you're going to be able to see everything right here. So I just want to make sure everyone highlights that. So let's jump into ZBrush here and let's cover some of the things on top of what Mr. Drust has already spoke about. I just want to go in a couple other features that would help everyone to have some other ideas, because I know there were some bridging questions and some other things like that as well. I also want to cover some of the polish features because I think it can be very useful, because during Joseph's creation process, when he was doing the panel loops, he was doing some very cool stuff, but I want to show a really nice feature that is very useful. All right, so let me dive into that. So we're going to get into the scales, but I want to touch base on this and start working here and show you some other nice techniques and just hitting some of those questions that were coming through. So I'm going to turn this into a Dynamesh just like Mr. Drust did. So I'm going to grab that and throw that in a Dynamesh. So as Drust was working, he was making these polygroups. So I want to show again, reiterate, and show another feature that could be useful, because people were asking cleaning up the mesh and doing things with the mesh. So I want to show a couple other features just to tackle those questions that were coming up. So I'm going to switch to my handy dandy move brush. Okay. So I'm just going to be pulling out and just kind of making some kind of, maybe I'll make my own another dragon head here. So again, as I keep working, you can see things like this as I start pulling on this, what I like to call endless clay for Dynamesh. So I'm a big component of when I'm working in Dynamesh, I actually like to drop pretty low in my resolution so that it's a lot smoother, and see I can really push and pull and make some quick adjustments rather fast through here, right? So this is really the goal of Dynamesh, is getting that first, I like to say that first 20% of our sculpt, that blocking out, that silhouette, and really being a creative process here and doing what we can do. And again, like Joseph highlighted a particular smoothing brush that I live on this smoothing brush, and it's the Smart Polish brush. So as far as smoothing goes, so again, that brush is going to be a little different in the fact that I want to highlight this again. When you're holding the shift key, you're going to switch to your smooth brush, and then you just start going on your surface, and you can see it's really smoothing the surface. So you can see the surface is kind of shrinking and almost moving. So think about it this way, is if I was in a room and I'm the smoothing brush, try not to laugh too much, I'm moving my hands to smooth, but think about it, maybe I'm also walking as I smooth, so you're actually pushing on the surface a little bit more while you're smoothing things out. So the Smart Polish is more of I'm standing in one spot, and think about if you put your hands on the wall, and unless you're Superman or somebody else, or Wolverine, I can't go through the wall, right? So then I'm going to slowly just smooth out, move my hands around the wall. Think about more, that's what these other brush is doing. So again, I'm holding shift key, and I'm tapping on the surface, and then I'm letting go of shift key. And you can see that does not make as much destruction to the surface, so I'm still using that brush right now. So again, the key point here is when I'm holding just shift and I just start moving the surface, you can see the difference. You can see that's really kind of smoothing and pushing the surface down. If I'm holding the shift key and then I tap on the surface and then let go of shift, you get that very nice smoothing. And I want to highlight something in the brush palette for everyone as well. So in the brush palette, there's options right here down at the bottom for your smooth brush modifiers. You can even make your alternate smooth brush be bigger than what is out. So what I mean by that is right now my draw size is sitting at 492, right? So when I hold that shift key, you can see that doesn't change as far as the size goes. So what's nice sometimes is when you're really getting into those details, you're working with a smaller brush, but then you want to smooth it. I mean, you're like, oh, I need a larger brush size for the smoothing portion. What you can actually do is here, we'll make it a little bit smaller brush. We're going to go into your brush palette here again, smooth brush modifiers, and let's just double this alternate brush size. So I'm going to double it to 2. And now when I hold the shift key, you can see the brush size actually doubles. So again, I'm going to let go of the shift key and then hold that shift key. And then now you're getting a lot bigger, twice the size. Okay. So also what lives in this menu, I'm going to put this back to 1, is this slider right here, which is your polish strength. So that slider is only controlling this alternate smooth brush that Joseph and I were touching base on here. Okay. So again, that's the one where I'm holding shift. I let go of shift, but my pen never leaves my tablet or my Cintiq. Okay. So moving on, as we start sculpting in here, right, and start moving around things and start going through what I want to have happening here, you might want to start doing again the polygroup structure. And let's maybe think about making this guy be a little different as far as working on him. I want to maybe make him a little more hard surface. All right, so I'm going to, I've been playing with my ZBrush. All right, so I've got, maybe build up a little brow here, work through here, Dynamesh, start digging in, right? I'm gonna put a little eye here, so I'm gonna use an insert brush. I'm just gonna grab that insert sphere. And of course we can draw that out for those that are the veterans here. We can draw that out and start locating an eye. Maybe I'm going away from a dragon now. Maybe it's becoming like a condor. Who knows? So I've got this as one subtool. So I want the eyes to be their own separate subtool. So I'm just going to go to the split options here. And I'm going to grab either one of these two. It doesn't really matter. So I'm going to say split by unmasked points. And now we've got a separate subtool for the eyes. And I still got this piece that I'm making here. So what Drust started covering was building up the surface and using panel loops. And I saw a lot of people asking, hey, how can I maybe clean the geometry or keep it what I have going on? So his process, which I myself also use quite a bit, was using the masking capability to create a new polygroup, right? So again, that's just Control W to do that. So I can do either a mask, Control W. I can even use visibility, same thing, right? And Control W that, and now I got a new polygroup there. Okay, now what I like to do is I'm not really worried, and this is another reason I somewhat like to work really low polygon. So you see, we're not getting a very clean selection here. I'm not really worried about it because I'm going to show you guys a feature that comes in very handy for me when I'm starting to think about blocking out pieces. And in fact, when I start to do hard surface in ZBrush with the Dynamesh, I actually sometimes will like to use a little feature called groups in your actual Dynamesh option. So there's this groups option, and that's actually using polygrouping. So what that does is if I start making a new polygroup here, okay, and I hit the W, Control W, makes a new polygroup. If I'm to re-Dynamesh again, we're actually getting two pieces. So I've got this piece and I've got this piece. Okay, the key point here to understand is because those were not separate pieces when we started, there's got to be shells now. So this is one piece. So again, like Joseph was doing, if I hold down Control Shift and A, it selects that whole geometry shell, right? So now I can do a Control W and see now that's one polygroup. If I inverse my selection, you can see there's two colors there. They're two different polygroups. I can hit Control W and then there you go. Okay, the reason why this is important, okay, and I want to touch base on this, with this groups option on, you got to understand that this is a polygroup and this is a polygroup. So with this option on, ZBrush is going to try and keep this as its own shell and then close the surface off, and it's also going to try and do it to this other green portion. That's obviously not what I'm looking for when I'm trying to work with this. So obviously the best thing to do is down in our polygroup options, you can just hit auto group, and instead of me having and showing, I know ZBrush is making this already one polygroup and making this one polygroup. Okay, so when I use this option, because of that, I will definitely use our macros, which is the same thing as an action in Photoshop, if you've ever used actions in Photoshop. So if I know this is something I'm going to want to do, right, I can actually create a macro. So if I'm masking something out here, we'll do a nice little mask here. We'll Control W that, right? And if I re-Dynamesh, again, I'm getting two pieces here. So if I re-Dynamesh again, I want to make sure that this is still saying as one big shell. See, right now it's not. It is a big shell, but it's actually got multiple polygroups to it. We want this to be all one polygroup. So we want this auto groups to happen, okay? So what I'm going to do is just start a macro, okay? And I'm going to tell ZBrush I want a new macro. So I'm going to say that. It's asking me, hey, Paul, do you want to initialize ZBrush and start from fresh? I'm going to say, no, don't initialize. So now what's happening is we're recording every action that's happening within ZBrush. So when I hit this little auto group here, you can see I get the new polygroups. And then the Dynamesh, we can either do two things. We can either turn off the big Dynamesh button and turn it back on, or we're going to do the handy dandy control, click, and drag. So if you're going to do the control, click, and drag and make it a macro, I would highly recommend making that control, click, and drag somewhere in the corner and very small, like something like that, so then you can Dynamesh. And then when you're done your macro, you just say end macro, and then now you save it to your programs. So you're going to go into your program files, and you're going to go into your Pixelogic 4 or 7. Okay, and we want this to launch at startup. So we're going to go in our startup. Okay, and then you're going to see there's a macros folder here. So there's the miscellaneous folder. You want to put the macro in a folder. So I'm just going to throw it in here, and then I'm going to call this, we can call this Dyna, and then auto group. What does it say? I'll use some abbreviations just to keep my things small. All right, so I don't have to actually restart ZBrush. You can see it's already there. So now if I do something again like this, I control W, I Dynamesh, we again have this little issue right here, right? With the two polygroups, and I don't want that to be two polygroups. I want it to be one. So now I can just go to my macro setting and then run this, and then boom, there you go, it's done. So I find that incredibly useful because I use this all the time for blocking stuff out in a hard surface. So I wanted to touch base on that because I saw questions coming through, and I want to cover another feature here. So I'm going to repolygroup this to be one again. And I'm going to think again hard surface. So maybe I'm going to say this brow is going to be a hard surface piece here. I'm going to control W that. Let's really make sure you guys can see that. Okay, and I'm going to go throw that feature on that Joseph already touched based on, which was in the brush palette. We were in auto masking, and you can see this slider here, mask by polygroups. So this is a very powerful feature for, again, I'm in the creation stage, figuring out my hard surface. What do I want to do with this? Where do I want to go with this, right? So now that I've turned this slider to 100%, all brushes can only work on the selected actual polygroup first. Okay, so no matter what brush do, so if I'm in here, you can see, right, I can't go inside the green portion. See this? It's not moving. It won't let me touch in here. Or vice versa. If I touch in the green, see, I can only sculpt on that actual green portion. So it works with any brush. So the reason why I turn that on is if I'm really going to start blocking something hard surface and looking at what Drust also did for those paneling, I kind of want them to panel up together, right? So I can now just hold that control key, and I know I can't mask into the green now. So if I'm doing this, there is no way for me to mask into that green, and I can say, all right, there's my next piece, control W. So I can visually just create and just go, okay, is this how big I want that panel to be, right? I'm going to make the colors a little different so you can really see the difference here. Right? So you can see I'm just looking at it, and I'm having these bright colors, these polygroups sticking out at me that I can just quickly visually see hard surface wise, especially if I'm doing something like this. This is really popular for me when I'm trying to create maybe a suit for a human or a character like that. I find it very, very incredibly useful for stuff like that. So I want to continue maybe working with this and moving along with this. So I saw people started saying, okay, let's just look at this piece here, right? So in fact, let's duplicate this piece so we have it more than once, right? And let's just look at only this one. I'm going to go ahead and delete that other portion down there. Okay, on the bottom, that yellow piece. I'm just going to get rid of it. You know, while I'm here, I want to cover another little trick here. So if you guys also want to select these, what we call multiple polygon groups, or these bright colors that you're seeing here, if you're holding down the control shift key, right, and you click on that yellow one, I get only the yellow piece and nothing else. Okay, there's times where you're working where you want to maybe select multiple polygroups at once. So you can do that in ZBrush. So if I go to a point where there's two polygroups actually sharing that point, and I hold down that control shift and I tap, you're going to see I get those two polygroups now. So this becomes a benefit for me to be able to select multiple polygroups at once, right? I can even come in here and grab those. So I'm grabbing all 3 of these polygroups now because I clicked on a point that had all 3 of the polygroups available to me. All right, so let's continue working here. I'm just gonna continue sprinkling tricks here, and what I'm doing, I'm just growing on top of Drust's part, and then I'm gonna continue into new features as well. We're not going anywhere. I want to have some fun with you all, so I'm gonna get rid of this yellow polygroup, okay? And I'm just gonna look at this. Maybe this is going to be some kind of paneling thing that I'm gonna put on this dragon slash. I don't know what we're creating. Just there. In the art of Bob Ross's that are out there. There. Happy little trees, mountains, there. That's what we're doing right now. We're just creating. All right, so I'm gonna go into the tool, geometry, okay? And I want to modify that topology. I want to get rid of it, so I'm gonna delete hidden. So now all this is all I have. So like what Drust did, he was playing with his panel loops, right? So I'm gonna put a little more thickness to it. So we can really start getting a panel, maybe a little bit more. That's looking good. And maybe I also want to adjust those panels a little bit. So this graph right here is really controlling your panels. And you have to understand there's a relationship with this graph and this handy dandy little slider right here, which is the loops slider. All right, so let's say I want to create something a little different. All right, so I'm going to actually drop the points a little bit here. Grab another point and maybe make something more like this. Okay, so then when I panel loop, you can see I get in first, which is this part of my graph. Then this is shooting out, so then it's got to shoot out, right? And then stay flat, so now we're staying flat. So actually here, let me show a whole piece. So again, this is where that handy dandy Control-Shift-A. So if you guys want to know where that is in the UI, because I want to make sure I'm using shortcuts. This is about being fast and being proficient, right? And the easiest way I describe this, if you are sculpting with clay or you're drawing, you're going to have your tools right next to you. Oh, in the world of Bob Ross, because I grew up watching him too, he had his little tray there with all of his brushes, right? You're not going to have your fan brushes in a whole nother room of your house, right? And then have like a different type of brush only next to you. You want everything close. So I'm using shortcuts, but it also lives in the UI. So right here you have a visibility capability. So when I hold down that Control Shift and I tap, you can see I get that polygroup. So you can actually continue to grow. So right now I'm growing one poly loop at a time, and because the panel loops created something very clean, I can keep doing that. So you now see I'm getting the Dynamesh portion, and now it's not as clean because it's got triangles and quads, because the goal of Dynamesh is creating a nice evenly distributed surface to sculpt on. So I obviously don't want to keep here holding down Control Shift and just hold X, and you can do stuff like some crazy stuff and have some fun with this, you know, and whoa, shrink it and grow it, right? So there's a lot of things you can do. So I'm just using the shortcuts right here. So you have your shrink, which is Control Shift S. So the way I get through this is anything selection wise in ZBrush, remember you always got to be holding down that Control Shift key to select something. So if you can just remember, oh, I always have to hold down Control Shift for anything with selecting, then you can start putting in your memory banks there, like me. Oh, now I know if I hit S, I'm shrinking the selection, right? So again, Control Shift, tapping S shrinks, tapping S shrinks, right? Control Shift X as an expand is actually growing. And you can see that shortcut right there, Control Shift X. And then Joseph and I are just using this shortcut, Grow All, Control Shift A to get that whole piece. Okay, so I just want to, again, touch base on this stuff because I know it was coming up. So back to this panel looping. So this graph is really important, okay? You got to have first enough loops to support the points that you're putting in here. So if I start going crazy and I start adding a lot more points like this, I got to make sure I put enough loops here to block in the points here. So if you just want to count the points, that's where I would start. You at least want to go that minimum in the loop slider so you can actually have this what you're looking for. So I'm going to delete these, and delete these, you just click on the point and drag it out of the graph, and then it's delete. It's gone. So again, click on the point, drag it out, it's gone. Okay, pretty straightforward for that. Okay, if you guys want to change these points right now, you can see it's very harsh. You want to change it to be more round, like that. All you have to do is, again, hold that point, pull it out, pull it back in, and you can switch it from a harsh point to a soft point. Now, you can see here there's this checkered board. That's there for a reason, okay? If you look, there's 8 vertically up, right? So the halfway point is 4. So why this is important, if we go undo our paneling here and go back to the spot where, ooh, and then wow your friends, undo. Okay, go back to the spot where we only had the polygroups before the paneling here. I'm actually going to move these top points higher than the 4th square. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So this line right here, I'm going to move these points higher than that 4th row, okay? And when I panel loop, we get the same panel loop, but if you notice, this area right here is now starting to overlap. So I'm going to get in really close here. So you can see that it's starting to overlap the panels. Okay, so this becomes very useful. So now that I know that, okay, I can say, well, I want to have a little gap in my panels. I don't want that overlapping to happen. So besides the thickness controlling that gap, okay, you have this graph to also help you. So if I just drop it lower than that midpoint level and then now do the panel loops, you can see I get a nice little gap. So we want to give you those controls of what you're going to be able to do with the paneling, right? And then the bevel sliders, how strong of a panel you want. So it's at 50% right now. So let me touch on some questions that came up as Joseph was working, okay? So the major thing to understand about this panel looping, all right, there's a rule. And one of the rules is the tri-polygroup or 3 polygroup plus. Okay, so if I undo my panels, there's points here where there is multiple polygroups meeting. Like maybe if I decided to do something like this, let's do a little something like this, so we get a different polygroup there. So right here in this region right now, we've got 3 polygroups meeting. If you notice, if I do a panel loop, you see this point right here, it's staying very harsh or sharp, right? So I can control that as a user now with just polygrouping, okay? So I've got those 3 polygroups and it's becoming very harsh. It's not rounding, okay? So what I mean by that, let's take a little snapshot here. And I'm just going to turn off Spotlight that I'm using. Let's snapshot this one, all right? We're going to undo. And let's undo that polygroup that I did. So we're back to this portion, and then we panel loop that. So you can see there's a big difference there now in that paneling that I'm getting. On my left, you see that sharp area right there. That's because there were 3 polygroups there. We're in here, because now there was only 2, it rounds it off for us. So this rule comes in handy, especially for the next feature I'm about to show you, that some people were asking, hey, how do I clean up the surface when I start moving things around, okay? So what I like to do if I'm working in this panel loop or I'm working in sections, right? The brush that I prefer to use sometimes is not just the move brush, right? So our move brush we can grab and we start pulling on things. So here's the beauty of this polygrouping, right? What do I have on again? If you remember, we've turned on in the brush palette, we've turned on this mask by polygroups. So in essence, I can move, it's an auto masking, I can move just only this polygroup, and you can see I'm creating a wider spot there, right? So I don't want that on, okay? I actually want to turn that off right now, because I just want to start maybe moving and getting a little bit more of a different design here, and just moving the shapes in general. Because maybe I am making, something that's going to sit on top of this guy that's going to be some kind of paneling. And, I'm having some fun and I'm continuing to push this panels. So another move brush that comes in extremely handy for everybody, all right, is this move topological brush. So it's right next to the move brush. Okay, so I'm going to click on that. And now what we have here is we are limiting the move brush based upon topology. And in our case right now, we have topology, right, that is actually multiple shells, right? Because if we look at just this again, we've got 1, 2 here, right? 3 and 4, 5, 6 shells. So watch. Now I can move only this shell. So I can go massive with my draw size, like huge, right? We can even go to the point right now, the default to ZBrush's max draw size is 1,000, right? You can actually make that bigger. And in some cases, I like to make that bigger. So in your preferences, okay, if you go to your draw, see your right here, your max brush size, you can actually make it 5,000 if you want. And below that, there's another slider that's almost like a multiplier, and it can make it even bigger, right? So now if I click on that S key, you can see I can actually go really big, right? So I can go ginormous here, but the beauty of this brush, no matter how big it is, it only moves the one paneling. I'm not going to be able to move any other panel, right? So this becomes pretty handy. Here's a nice little trick for you as well. So I can actually make this brush size down to 1, and look what it does. It moves the whole piece. So I'm actually moving right now in Y and X, right? So the brush, when you change this move topological to a size of 1, you're now telling the brush, I want you to just look at the shell as a whole piece, right? And let's move that around. Okay, so this is very handy, especially, again, talking on the stuff that Drust and I are touching base on, making creations, right? So now if I go a little bit bigger, now I can just move it a little bit at a time. And again, I'm not touching any other panels. So I know the question came up, well, when you guys start doing this, you're really pulling and pulling and pulling on stuff, right? Which, yeah, we're in a creation process. I'm definitely pulling on things. And we might also accidentally, I might actually smooth some of that panel out, and I'm like, uh-oh, right? And you've been working on this for quite a bit of time, maybe hours, and you forgot that, oh man, I really want to keep those panels alive. Here's what you can do, and it's very nice to be able to do this. And this also is going to establish our rule, that 3 polygroup rule. Okay, so I'm going to open up the geometry because I just want to touch base on this again, and I really want to hammer this home. We're talking about ZBrush giving me the possibility to just create and go crazy in the beginning stages, and then I'll show you how you can clean it up as well. So right here we have this polish slider. So this slider is actually using and living in this deformation. So we have these polish sliders. So there are several here. So you got polish, you got polish by features, you got polish by groups, you got polish by crisp edge. I want to cover what these sliders do for you, okay? So this is another reason why I like to work a little bit lower when I'm blocking out and figuring out what is my design, where am I going with this, right? Because if I start using something like this, I can immediately see I can really polish this back and it becomes very round everywhere now, right? But looking at this, I have a problem here where I've lost my panel. Watch this. We can use this little polish by groups, and the more we go, you can see it's getting sharp again right there. Okay, so these little circles are here. They're not there because we want to torment you. They're there because there's 2 actual algorithms, or there's 2 types of strengths here for this. Okay, so with it closed, you're telling the slider, try and keep the form that we've built here as much as possible. So what can be very handy is I can go 100%, right? See what that does? You can see the slight movement. And down here at the bottom, I can say repeat to active. So that's repeating to the active subtool. So that's another 100%. That's another 100%, right? Over and over and over again. Right? So I'm going to undo those and get back to where this was a little destroyed again. And if I click on this circle, make it open, we're now telling this slider, you know, don't worry so much about keeping the form. Worry more about making sure those polygroups are really polished, nice, and sharp. So if I do 100% of this, we're going to get a very different result. Do you see the difference there? How much stronger that is? It's a lot stronger, right? You can see the whole form, the silhouette has completely changed now of my design. And part of this that it's pushing so much is, again, I'm pretty low in polygons. I'm only at 5,500 polygons. It's not a lot, okay? So I'm going to undo this, and what I want you guys to start thinking about is, well, what if I just did a little mask and I inverse that, right? And then now I do a little bit of polish by groups, boom. So I can even go and fix certain portions, right? So taking that to another level, you could grab a polygroup, and then I can just polish just that polygroup, right? And only that polygroup is being moved now, okay? So that polish by groups, okay, is using the polygrouping to decide where it gets sharp, okay? So looking at this piece, right, and what we've been talking about is that third polygroup rule, right? So when there's 3 polygroups, if I don't want this to be round anymore, okay, I could definitely take the time to say, all right, let's select both those polygroups, okay? So what I'm going to do is click on that point so it selects both polygroups at once. So that's what I was talking about. Hey, here's a great example. I need both polygroups. So I'm just going to select just those 2 polygroups. And then boom, that's all I got. Nothing else, right? So what I'm going to do is actually maybe, you know what, there's a portion here I wanted to get kind of sharp. So right here, maybe along this edge, I wanted to get sharp. So I'm going to switch to my select lasso, right? And I'm going to lasso out those pieces. So now what that's done is created that nice little bridge so I can maybe get rid of this. And now I'm left with just that portion and only that portion. I'm going to do that handy dandy Control W, create that new polygroup, okay? Then I'm going to hide those portions because I want to have alternating polygroups like you get when you create the panel loops, because that's exactly what's happening. Is the panel loops is this is one polygroup, the next row is a different polygroup, and then another polygroup, so forth and so on. So I'm just recreating what I get for panel loops, but now my design's changing a little bit and I'm making artistic decisions here. Okay, so now when I bring everything back, you can see, remember that rule, that 3 polygroup rule? Boom, I've got a 3 polygroup rule there. Boom, another one there. I just got to use the booms, right? And then, of course, 3 polygroups there. So what's going to happen if I now start to decide, okay, oh, you know what? I want to take maybe this portion here, and now I want to start polishing only this piece. So let's watch what happens right here, because right now we're kind of round, right? So I'm just going to close it so it's not so destructive. And I'm going to start polishing, and look what's happening. You see, that's getting really sharp. So here, we'll do 100%, and I'm just going to repeat the active as much as I want. And you can see now those edges, right, that edge right there, that edge line, is not moving at all. So even as I'm creating, because people were asking, well, you've stretched it, you've ruined it, or you've lost some of your paneling, you don't lose it. I can put it back, I can recreate it. It doesn't stop there, though, okay? So another way I could have done this, let's go backwards, let's undo, and let's look at another technique here that could be beneficial. Because maybe some of you are going, well, Paul, I want to keep this polygroup consistency through here. Like, I don't want to change that. But I still want to be able to do what you just showed and what you did. Okay, here's another way. Here's, again, where I can decide, you know what? Let's switch to that handy dandy ZModeler. And I'm going to hover over an edge, hold that space bar, and I'm going to click on Crease. Do I want to crease one edge, or do I want to crease the whole edge loop, right? So I can say complete edge loop, and then I can tap, and now that's creased, right? And because I'm in symmetry, it's happening on both sides. So when I pull this back and bring everything back, you can see that this edge right here is creased, but my polygroup still stayed consistent. So what I mean by that, this polygroup's still all the same, this polygroup's still all the same, and so forth and so on. And the color here is changing because I have another light in my scene. A lot of times here I like to maybe change my light up a little bit and have some different things with the lighting. So that's why I'm having that look as well. So now let's look at this, and instead of using maybe polish by groups, let's see what crisp edges do. So if I do this, you can see this edge now, right, is staying very sharp, but everything else is smoothing. Okay? So now we have, all right, I've got a crease here. It's holding my edge, but I don't lose everything else. Come on, man. I want to keep that. So I'm going to undo this. And I'm going to use the handy dandy, you know, what I like to call Crease Paul Gaboury. It's not really the Crease Paul Gaboury, but darn it, it says Crease PG, so I'm going to use it for as long as I can, okay? So obviously that Crease PG is referring to polygrouping, right? So if I click this, wherever there's a polygroup, automatically now gets a crease, right? So if I look again just at this shell, right, I get all those creases going where the polygroups are as well, if I want, okay? And now I still have that crease right there. So again, if I start using this crease right here, this crisp edge, you can see all this is staying nice and sharp, and now this is becoming sharp, and I haven't lost my polygrouping. Right? So let me repeat the active a couple times so you guys can visually see what's happening here. Okay, I'll go a couple more times. Right? So now we've got workflows here where we can use polygrouping, we can use creasing. But wait, there's more. Okay? So I'm going to undo, go back to where we were before we creased everything. Okay, so back to this way, where we had only a crease here, but we still had our polygrouping. Okay, I definitely want to say, hey, I don't want creasing anywhere else, but maybe this edge. But I've destroyed my mesh a little bit, and I want to be able to keep doing these tricks that I'm showing everybody, right? So this is where this third one comes into play. So this polish by features, okay, it's combining your polygrouping and your crease edges. So if I start using this slider, you can see this is staying nice and sharp where all my polygroup changes are, and now that creased edge is also staying sharp. So it's up to us, you know, creative-wise what we want to do, okay? And then me, you know, especially we're doing something hard surface, you know, I'm living and breathing this dynamic subdiv, right? So I'm tapping D to turn it on, right? I can start seeing what I'm doing here, right? I'm going to go to my dynamic part, and right now I'm smoothing this, okay, 2 times, right? Whichever one's got to understand, we're previewing what our subdivision levels would look like. So even if I go up a third one, this is what it would look like at 3 subdivision levels. If I go up to that, this would look like when it's the 4th. So to give you an idea again, I'm going to snapshot that down. And Drust, whenever you got something, just throw it in my little menu there. So let's go ahead now and see, well, if we turn dynamic off and we actually divide 4 times, right? It's the exact same thing, but we're now playing with 358,000 polygons, right? And I can't use certain features that I love to use for hard surfacing. One of them being slicing, another one being mirror and welding, right? I can't use those now because I've got real subdivision levels. So, and now that I'm so dense, these features I've been showing you, they're not as strong because there's more polygons there, right? So I'm going to undo this. We're going to turn our dynamic back on. And I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what, let's do that crease PG. And we're getting these ridiculously sharp angles now. So when I'm doing hard surface, I definitely don't want to have like perfect hard edges. Because if you look at anything in your room right now, manufacturing, there's nothing that's going to be perfectly 90 degrees like we can in the digital world. And this is how that subtlety, this little subtle thing can start bringing more realism, okay? So because there's manufacturing involved, and when you're doing molds and casting, you're not going to be able to keep that 100% 90 angle. You're just, when you're manufacturing something. So what I'm doing is this crease level here, this is one of my favorite things they live by. I'm going to drop this to 2, and this has been my sweet spot when I'm working, okay? So I'm looking at this, so let's do another little snapshot. Let's see what our differences are here. I'm going to snapshot that down, and now we're looking at this edge here. I'll turn off temporarily my spotlight, which is hosting my images. Don't worry, we're still going to get to the scale stuff. Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere. Skipping lunch. I'm hanging with you guys. Okay, so I'm going to see this edge right here. I'm going to turn off dynamic, and then I'm going to smooth, and you can see I start getting a little different of a look. It's not so harsh, right? It's starting to soften a little bit. Because what's going on is I'm telling ZBrush to only hold the creasing for 2 subdivision levels. And right now I'm telling dynamic subdiv to do 3, no, do 4, and now it's showing you the results of what that looks like on that number of subdivision levels, and it's smoothing. So I'm immediately creating like a nice chamfer right there, right off the bat, right? And this allows me to still have rounded surfaces, okay, and things like that. So this is leading me to one of the questions that I saw. And I saw that someone's asking about the lighting setup. I'll touch base on that definitely. Okay. So I'm looking at this and saying, all right, the surface, though, along here is not so great, right? And part of that is because if we drop this back down and we look at our surface, we're getting, you know, like weird triangles and things like that. So someone asked, well, how can we clean this up? All right, and retopologize this. Well, one way we can do this was I can just show only this polygroup, right? Because this is the piece that I want to clean up. I can go to ZRemesher, okay? And if I just click this, right, ZBrush is going to remesh this portion, right? So you see here we're getting all quadded. Beautiful, nice and clean. But look at the density of it, right? It's very dense, right? And if I start smoothing, right, we are combining it here for you. But now you've got, in essence, 2 type of different surfaces, right? I want to say, you know what I want you to do when you remesh this? And I would highly recommend that in the display properties, turning on double, okay? This is allowing ZBrush that no matter what direction the camera's facing, it'll show all the surfaces. Because by default, this helps you with flipped normals. ZBrush will only look at the normals facing the camera. So when I rotate, you see it disappears because the normals aren't actually facing the camera. So if I turn now, I can see it. So this is why double's off. It helps you see flip normals. But turning double on can be useful so I can see, yeah, this is definitely the only portion that I want selected. Okay? I'm going to go back to the ZRemesher. And what I'm going to do is use a little feature we have here. Okay? And I'm going to say freeze border because I only want to remesh this portion and I want those vertex points along the edging here to be frozen. So it really doesn't matter about my polygon count. When I click this, ZBrush is now remeshing, as you can see, and it's using, in essence, the base, the lower portion, as my polygon target goal, right? So now I've got a clean surface, right? So when I start now looking at this, I'm going to see a nice now, a lot better beveling happening there, or chamfering happening there. Okay, so there are in essence 3 types, okay, of using the dynamics. So I'm going to touch on this, and then we're going to get into more of this guy and how we can start creating scales and use the little handy dandy plugin. So I'm going to cover the dynamic and the 3 differences, but I also, someone asked about the lighting. So what actually is, I created a matcap for myself, right? That is this lighting. So you can create a matcap, or what all I did was in the light palette, right? We can use your lighting here, but we also have light caps as well to do lighting. So I'm just creating a secondary light if I want to. So I can say, let's create that as another light. So now this is another light here, right? So even if I want to make this, say maybe now a blue instead of that orange color, and let's really crank that intensity up so you can visually see what's going on here. Right? And now what I'm going to do is I want this light to be, in essence, a rim light or sitting behind the surface, not in front of the surface. Right now we're sitting in front of the surface. If I'm moving this around, I'm sitting in front of the surface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on this little circle right here. And ZBrush turns it into a rim light, right? And then now I can start doing this, and now I can really say, okay, that color's a little nuts. Let's not go so extreme with that color, and the intensity is a little much, right? So now I can start dropping this. And now as I'm moving around, see, I can see blemishes. So you can see some blemishes here. So this is where that smart smoothing can also help get rid of those blemishes as well for you. So it's a great way to work, Okay, and then I could turn this into a matcap. But to me, I prefer using this basic materials, either this basic 1 or basic 2. And really the big difference between these two materials is this second basic material 2 has the specularity turned up a lot more. So that spec helps me catch things, especially if I'm hard surface. And then because I'm using a standard material, the lighting affects as I move it. I can see how the lighting's working, right? If I was to switch to a different matcap, I know a popular one is matcap gray. You can see all that lighting is now gone, right? So I would have to create a matcap with this lighting, which is in essence just creating a sphere, right? So I would just be able to, I'm assuming everybody wants to see this, yeah? Everyone wants to see how to create a really quick matcap with this matcap gray and maybe have that blue light as a rim. Let me see the comments. Yes, yes, yes. I want some interactivity here. People involved. Okay, so here's an easy way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to turn off our spotlight. We are going to make a document size, and this is starting to lead into stuff anyways that we're talking about. And right here in the document, here's our width and our height. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I want to make this a perfect square. So 512 is more than enough by 512. I don't need any more than that. I'm going to tell the document to resize. ZBrush is now asking me, would you like to resize? I'm saying, yep, let's go ahead and resize. All right. So now I want to start creating, say, some kind of custom matcap, let's say, or something that I want there, right? So I can drag out my model, and instead of this platypus dragon thing that I've got going in here, right, I'm going to just select a sphere, right? So I'm just going to my lightbox tool and selecting a sphere, right? And then now I want to start creating, right, my own, let's say, material, right? So right now matcap gray is on, right? Which again, matcaps, right? You can't affect their lighting, right? It doesn't affect it. Okay, so what I can do here is I'm going to use this sphere in ZBrush, and I'm going to tell ZBrush to frame it. So I framed it to the document, right? So it's not hitting just the F key, right? So you can frame it to your document. This is really important portion if you're going to create a custom matcap using this technique. And you can do this, think about this, you can do this if you're in Photoshop as well. So think about it, if we were in Photoshop, we could do this same workflow. So what I'm going to tell ZBrush to do is, hey, I want you to grab that information, right? But maybe instead of using this, I might want to say, let's use this material, right? Which can be affected by the light, right? So I can start really playing with that intensity. I can say, how sharp do I want that to be, okay, in the surface, right? And at any point in time, I can switch to another model and really see, how's that light going to work, say, like on a head? Is it really what I'm looking for, right? Is that really what I want? Maybe, you know what, looking at my modifiers, the ambient's turned up a little bit. Maybe turn down the fuse. I want that material to be a little bit darker. Let's up that spec, and let's play with that spec a little bit, right? So all I'm doing is I'm creating, in essence, my own material starting from the basics. So the ambient obviously really washes it out. I don't want it to wash out as much, right? The diffuse is pulling on a diffuse color more and more and more, right? I don't want it so strong. I want it to be a little bit darker, right? And then obviously our specularity is giving that shiny look. And if we're talking hard surface, I might want to have this shiny. And I opened up my graph, which now everybody knows how to use this graph, right? So I can click the point, move it around. I can turn it into a harsh point, right? And now we're going to get a very different looking spec, right? And I'm making this a tighter specularity by moving it closer to the corner, right? So see, this widens it. This makes it a little bit tighter. So maybe I want to make that spec more of a round slowly, right? Really look in the difference right here in the forehead. So round and sharp. See that? This can make a big difference. So think about this. You can be sitting in, let's say, automotive design is very popular, right? Where they'll have a lot of squared lights above the car, making that squared look. You can definitely do this, right? So I'm going to keep it something more like this, right? So I'm starting to create a material. I can see what it looks like on the model. Do I like where this particular light is sitting, right? Do I want to maybe push it more this way, push it more that way, right? Great. I can even throw in a light cap if I want to. So I can throw a new light in here, and now the light cap's here. I can even grab color here, maybe throw some warm color. The beauty here is I can make this a gobo light, right? So what I've just done is I've told the light it can only be squared, right? And this is where I like using light caps. As you can see, it's squared. I can play actually now with the aperture. I can play with the fall off. Like, do I want that to be a really harsh red light or kind of slowly dissipate from square, right? And I can even change the width if I want. And the beauty here is tile. So just like I was talking about that automotive thing, I can tile here, right? And start creating this. So I'm using lighting on a standard material, but I'm using it to create a matcap is my end goal here, right? So let's just delete, well, you know what, let's put this light back on. Let's go ahead and make a warm light. Let's make it more of an orange. There. Happy little trees, right? Maybe a little bit smaller, a little bit stronger in the strength. Maybe put it way up here. And I definitely want to, again, make it be a gobo light. Okay, so I want to have that squared look, and then I'm going to say how many times do I want that to tile. Let's go 3 and 3, right? And then again, I can adjust and look at how this is looking on a model, right? And we can load any model that we want. I'm just trying to figure out which is going to be a nice roll off that maybe, yeah, this is good. This is what I'm looking for. Maybe make my aperture a little bit bigger. Perfect. Play with that fall off a little bit. Beautiful. That's what I'm looking for. Now, the point I said a sphere is now all I have to do, right, is I'm going to divide up enough so that the surface is smooth, okay? And now all I have to tell ZBrush to do is grab this sphere, okay? So I can go to my texture, and I can go grab dock. This is the same thing that Joseph was doing when he switched to the MRG. It's a tongue twister to say. MRGBZ grabber, MRGZB grabber. Okay, everyone do it 5 times fast now at your home. MRGZB grabber. So I'm just saying instead of grabbing the texture and the alpha, just only grab the texture, and that's the document. And now I've got an image, right? So if I click on my texture, I've got an image here, right? So what's beautiful now is let's go ahead and let's get rid of this light, okay? Let's turn off this light, and we're back to just the default lighting, right? That's what we're back to. And I'm like, no. When I sculpt, specifically hard surface, I'm going to want this type of lighting every time I'm doing hard surface. So I'm going to create my own material. So all we have to do now is select any matcap. It does whatever one we want. Okay, so here I'll select this green one, right? Open up our modifiers, and down at the very bottom here, we've got an image. So all I have to do is click on this and then grab the material I want, and bingo, bango, right? We've got this. So this particular one's got transitioning happening. I don't want any of that. There's an intensity change happening, so we can put this all back at the defaults, right? And then there's a depth playing here as well. So let's put our depths back to normal, right? And then boom, there you go. Now I've got this material that is now, in essence, taking that lighting from that we made in ZBrush, okay? And then now if I go back to our handy-dandy little ostrich dragon thingy that we're doing here, let me make my document size bigger again. So I'm just going to resize. No, don't change it. I'm not proud of what I'm doing. Okay, and now you can see I now have that lighting. So see, when I turn a little bit, I get that blue rim. I'm getting that yellow. And then as I work, no matter what brush I'm on, right, I can work with this and see what it's going to look like to my surface. Right, so that's pretty much what I was doing for that default lighting. I saw somebody also asked navigating question. I'm going to convert everyone now. This is it. This is how I want to do it. So I want to do navigation. There's actually 3 navigations. If you count the buttons, there's 4 navigations in ZBrush. So you obviously have your navigation here, your move, your scale, your rotate, right? I don't use that. You can hold the space bar and then you can get them here as well. Or if you tap the right click, you'll get it as well. Okay, this little quick menu. But as you can see, I'm not really using that. I'm gonna load a full head character here. So let's load our demo soldier, right? So now any model I load, I'm in essence in the lighting of the matcap now, right? Okay, so let's look at just him. Ah, he's naked. Okay, so navigating him, okay, I want to maybe move towards the head, and I want to do something like this. I want to put my cursor right where I want to scale into or zoom into, and you can see it's going right to the eye. Now maybe I want to go to the tip of the ear. See, now it's going to the tip of the ear. Pulling out. Maybe I want to go to the delt. And now I'm scaling right to the delt. Also notice, even though my cursor is sitting over top of the mesh, I can still rotate. I can still move, right? And the rotation is also wherever I'm clicked, that's what it's rotating around. So here I can rotate around the brow up here now. Rotate around by the ear. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm using that handy dandy right click navigation. So I like to phrase this as the Paul. This is huge for me. This made my workflow so much faster. Okay. The default, obviously, that some of you might be used to is, just tapping your document rotates, holding the Alt key and tapping your document moves, and then as long as your pen doesn't come off, you let go Alt, that's your scale. So you run into things like if you're doing this, you got to come over to this white border to do any moving, right? That's a split second of lost time. But you think of how much you're going to be working, rotating, and moving. I want to be able to do this where I don't have to move my cursor at all. And that's my right click. So welcome to my team of the right click. Everybody come join me on this side. So all I'm doing, I'm on my Cintiq right now. So the Wacom pen, that side button, there's the 2 buttons on the side of the pen. The bottom one by default is right click. So all I have to do is hover over my pen, right? Or I got to hover over my whatever I want as far as tablet or a Cintiq, and then just hold that down, that right click, and I'll rotate. Okay? If I now hold the Alt key, then I can move. Right? So this is right click, hovering over my Cintiq or tablet, and I'm holding the Alt key to move. Now if I want to zoom, okay, I'm going to hold the Control key, that right click, and I can zoom in and out. And again, the beauty of this, okay, is that I can keep my cursor where it's at and do all the rotations and moving it. Unfortunately, you can't see my stylus. But you can set this up on your stylus however you want. There is a third way to do some navigation, which is a gestural thing. This is default settings. So what I'm showing right now is default. You have both navigations turned on, which you can turn off the right click navigation, by the way. So in your preferences, you can turn this off. Okay, so there's some other things here I want to show. So right here in the navigation, so here's your right click pop-up. That's this thing. This thing. If you don't want right click to pop that up, which I don't use that, okay, that's what this button does. And then here, this is on by default. But if you guys don't want to use that right click navigation, you can turn that off if you want as well. Okay. And I know someone asked about a memory question. Right here in the mem, this shows you the max number of polygons you can get per subtool. Right. So on my computer right now, I can get 61 million per subtool. Okay. And in HD geometry, I can get 30 million. You know what? And why I'm here, this compact mem slider, I know it's been out there all over the internet. This slider is more about the memory usage when ZBrush is not being used, is really what this slider's goal is. So all of us, you're working in ZBrush, and maybe you tab over to your browser or your email or any other application. This tells ZBrush how much memory that it just at least minimum needs to have to run in the background, really. Okay, so if you crank this all the way up to 4 gigs, right, it is always going to use 4 gigs. Even if I tab over into another application, ZBrush is always going to pull 4 gigs minimum, right? So I like to keep this at the default because if I'm over in another application or in my email, I'm keeping this at 256, which is 256 megabytes because I don't need ZBrush doing a lot. Ah, we've got someone. I like it. I recruited some right clickers. Yes! Yes! Welcome to the team! We're going to make some t-shirts maybe as this grows in this ZBrush Live. We'll have, I'm a member of the right click team. You never know. It'll grow. Okay. So let's move along here. Let's move along. So let's bring back these images. And I don't know if I've missed anything, but we're going to go back to this and look at some scales, and let's look at some array mesh and some nanomesh. Okay, so there are multiple ways to create, say, this scaling that I did, and this render was completely done in ZBrush, by the way, as well, because really what I was doing was creating a 3D piece to almost create a tattoo for a character. But because it's 3D, look at all this stuff I've been talking about with lighting and stuff. I can make this look like anything now, and if I want to change the colors of the tattoo, it's easy. I just pull up the model and I change the colors now. Okay. So how I did the scaling is with some array mesh is how I did this. Okay. So this is one way we can create the scales, and I found this very useful for me. So what I want to cover here is a little handy dandy tool. And as Joseph was going through his hard surface stuff, okay, and working on things, I know there was also a question here about bridging, okay, polygons. So if you guys switch to ZModeler and you want to bridge, right, from one to another, right, so if I want to bridge from here to, say, maybe a face over here, right, if I hold that space bar and I switch to bridge, see, you have 2 polys and you have connecting polys, right? So these are different, very different things. So if I do 2 polys, right, and I click and then I click, boom, it bridges them. Okay, so I'm bridging now across to those 2 polygons. I don't know if those users are still here. Or I could switch to QMesh, right? And QMesh eventually bridges. So it snaps. That is a bridge, right? QMesh has to have that bridging happening, right? So, and I can get real crazy here. And we can maybe do something like this. And maybe do something like this. And let's go ahead and switch to delete. And because I got the temporary polygroup, I've deleted all those faces at once. So this is the benefit of that temporary polygroup as well. Okay, and since we're here, there's something else I want to show about this temporary polygroup. Let me switch to a little bit, let me brighten this up a little bit just so visually you guys can, let's put that ambient up a little bit more. There, just so visually you guys can really see this. We don't want that speck up. There we go. Much better. So now you guys can really see that. So again, this temporary polygroup, everybody, is huge. And I'm going to show you really cool tricks, too, with the nano with this and everything as well. So I'm holding the Alt key, right? And we can paint temporary, right? And when I let go, I just get a new polygroup. But I can keep painting with that polygroup. And every time I tap Alt, right, I generate a new polygroup. So in essence, I can paint with polygrouping, right? So if I hold the Alt key and start going and then I let go, you can see what polygroup am I painting with. I'm painting with this one, right, which is stored in the brush. So if I'm doing this and then I switch, right, and now I've created a new one, and then I'm holding Alt, and now I'm creating a 4th one, right? So there's various different polygroups here now. And maybe there's times where I'm like, hey, you know what? This purple one, this face right here, I really want it to be purple. Okay, so the benefit here is because this purple one was the last polygroup I had, I can hold the Alt key, tap on it, let go of the Alt key, and it becomes purple. Because that purple polygroup is stored. You can decide what gets stored in that brush. Okay? So what I can do here is, no, stop it. I want this green one is what I want, right? So I can hold the Alt key, right, and tap. And if I let go, you guys are getting the purple. What I'm going to do is now hold the Shift key. And you can see it switch back to green. So now I can paint with this green. right? So now if I go over to this purple and I'm painting, right, I'm now painting the green one. So I can control this. So I'm going to undo this, okay? And I want you guys to understand what we're doing here. I'm just showing you a really cool trick right now. That's something to do, okay? So what I'm really doing is I'm hovering over a face, I'm holding spacebar, and I'm switching to polygroup. See, now I can have all my target options. I can do a polyloop. I can polyloop it this way and polyloop this way. I can go whatever way I want now, right? But if you notice, there's some options down here, right? As we come down here, there's modifiers. So you see there's override, additive, and pick existing, right? So I can pick existing, and I can say, you know, I want this one, this little teal one, right? So I'm going to click on that face and see it, because I have polyloop selected, that's all I get now is that one, right? So what I want to do, right, and because I'm clicking this, pick existing was the blue, right? This blue, if I go to this one, see it selects that one, right? Because I'm picking the underlining existing polygroup. So if I go back to override, all I get now is that stored polygroup. And all I'm doing is doing the magical alt thing, right? And the importance of this is now if I switch to say something like QMesh, I do a polygroup all, right? And so if I QMesh, see it all, even though they're separate shells, it's grabbing all those, okay? I'm grabbing every one of those same polygroup, right? And then this allows me to do, boom, I can pull it off, right? So I'm holding the control key to pull that off, and then boom, I can create Tetris, woo-wee, right? So I'm building upon some of the stuff that Joseph was covering as well and answering questions that were popping up here. And again, thanks for tuning in today. We're super excited about launching the ZBrush Live, and Joseph and I will be continuing to be on this channel every week when we can. All right? So clearing the alternate polygroup, you can't. There's always got to be one polygroup stored, James. So if I'm holding the Alt key, right, now I'm getting this one when I switch to Shift. See, it grabs the blue, and all I'm getting is the blue. Right? There's got to be some polygroup always stored with the brush, so it knows what to do when you start doing things like this, when you start, well, pulling on it, and then of course when you do a single polygroup, we're creating a new polygroup, right? There's stuff there that's involved in this, okay? So I would just Control W and I can re-polygroup, all right? So you guys got to think about this. So if I'm doing something like this, right, and then I go over to this one and say maybe I want something more like this, and I let go, they're the same polygroup. Right? So if I now did something like that, and I go over to this face and I switch to delete, right? And I say polygroup all, what faces are going to be deleted? Okay? So you can have this face deleted, right? But because I did polygroup all the blue polygroups gets deleted, and that temporary one. Right? So I can actually do an action where I've got temporary, I can switch to something like QMesh, polygroup all, and it's going to pull on the blue and that temporary one. And then see, now they both get re-polygrouped. Okay, so hopefully this is hitting home a little bit. So I just wanted to also just touch base on deleting this, okay? And now I can hover over an edge, and we can do a little bridgeroo here, and I'm going to say 2 holes. I'm going to say circular. Okay, I'm going to click on an edge that has a hole. The brush tells you, hey, click on the first hole. Boom, I click, and now the brush is saying click on the second hole, and then drag. Okay, so I'm going to click on this hole, and then now I can drag and make stuff like this happen. So up and down, okay, are my spans crossing over, right? And then left and right, in essence, is the arch, like the Arch of St. Louis, right? So here, I'm going to go this way so you guys can see this a little bit better when I do this. So I'm going to click here, and then there you can see my arch is changing, and I can change the spans. And I want you to also really look. This hole is not the same as this hole, but we're still closing it off and making it work. Right? So if I throw dynamic on, you can see what that looks like. Nice. Right? So I was just answering a question. Going back to the dynamic, I am in Tangent Central right now. So hopefully you all enjoy Tangent Central. Not to be confused with ZBrush Central, but Tangent Central. I'm going to reconstruct, make this a little bit lower. So again, dynamic, we're turning that on, right? So our smoothing algorithm, we're smoothing out that sphere. Okay? But what I can do is do a combination. So I can tell ZBrush, I want you to smooth, but keep it flat, right? And this is doing the same thing. If I was to turn off this SMT and then divide, see, it looks like nothing's happening, but it's dividing, right? It's giving us more polygons. So an old trick of the old hard surface days before dynamic was around was people would turn this SMT off, divide a couple times, turn it back on, and then divide, and then see what we'll get is kind of chamfering everywhere. Okay? So looking at dynamic, I'm turning this on, I can now tell ZBrush, no. I don't want to divide up, right? I want to do a couple flat and then start throwing some smooths. And now you can see what that's doing, but we're still sitting at 386 faces. We care about this again because now we can start using other things, like we can use our slice curve and slice across this, right? We can use our slice circle, right? And slice across a circle here, right? I can't do this with subdivision levels, and I can just look at just this piece now and do other things with this and switch to maybe I want to switch to the move, and I'm going to extrude this in, right? And then switch to the scale and extrude in again, maybe push it in a little bit, right? So all I'm doing is use the transpose to kind of even do an extrusion and an inset. Okay? So I'm switching to move, and if I hold that control key and this first circle, this middle circle, I extrude in. If I hold the control key and click on the last circle, it's ripping off like you can in ZModeler. If I switch to scale and hold control key and do this, you're doing 3-axis inset. If I hold control key and doing this middle circle, it's doing only 2 axes. Okay, so everybody, you can get information about these circles. If you look up here, see this action right here? This is in essence like our command line. So if you hover over this, right, it tells you what certain circles will do for you. So if I switch to move, see this changes. See it says clips. So I'm flattening this now with just the transpose, right? So now I can make weird clipping like this. It's on an angle, and I can clip this way with it. Okay, and then see after every circle, we give you different things that you can do. So if you look at the third one, you can even do inflating with a right click, right? And I can inflate and extrude. Okay, so back to the dynamic. All right, what we've also done here is we've given you a third option, which is QGrid. So I'm going to tell QGrid once. All right, and what this is doing is creating a global bevel. So I'm telling it to be a consistent, constant bevel, and then see I can move that bevel and make it bigger. All right, so there's with polyframe off. And here's with polyframe on. All right, so you guys can see the difference. So the more I turn this up, the more, in essence, more grids you're using. You're going around. Okay, so here, let me put this on a simpler model so you guys can see that. In fact, let's use the handy dandy initialized state here of a cube. Right? And let's say in the X I want 2, in the Y I want 1, in the Z I want 1, and make it a cube. So there we go. So you can really see this now. See if I play with this coverage, you can really play with this. Right? And if I don't want beveling, I can switch to a chamfer. This is really where the QGrid number comes in handy, because what kind of chamfer do you want? So if you drop this down, right, see the chamfer is not as strong. So the more I go up on this, you're getting a stronger chamfer. But this is really about creating something if you don't want any rounded shapes. So what I mean by that is, if I insert, here's a way you guys can click to have a single edge. Okay, so I'm just inserting, and I'm saying instead of multiple edge loops, I'm saying a single edge loop. Okay, so I'm just going to tap here, and then boom, that's dead center of this edge. So I'm going to undo. So this edge I'm clicking on, I tap, now I know I'm dead center. right? And if I click now on a point and I say, actually, let's split that point and make it round, I can start pulling on that point, right? And you can see what's happening. So I'm going to turn dynamic off. This is really what's happening. But if I turn dynamic on, we're telling it to do a bevel on every single edge, right? So every single one of these edges, so Shift D to turn it off, D to turn it on, right? So every one of these edges is getting beveled. That's not what I'm looking for, not in the remote. I want this to stay round, right? So this is why maybe I don't use Q grid. I use maybe a smoothing. So that's staying nice and round. Let's now go to that handy dandy Crease by Paul Gaboury, or Crease by Polygroup, really is what it stands for. If you're our man Joseph Drust, okay, you can click on, he likes to use this crease option. I know he's a fan of this, and then changing his tolerance. So you see it actually creased all sides, because this is saying any angle that's 30 degrees or higher, actually apply a crease. Okay, so Drust likes to use that one. I like to use the Crease PG a lot. I'll do a combination of the both like I'm doing. I haven't gotten to the tiling thing yet. We're going to get to it. Don't worry. I'm in super tangent world. And Lana's going to be going in 2 hours here as well. So reason why I'm doing this, again, I'm going to tell ZBrush, let's only hold that creasing for maybe a couple, all right? And to see it, because I've already got dynamic on, I'm going to turn it off and then turn it back on. And then that's what I have, right? So you can see I'm getting a chamfer. So if I want to hold the crease level for maybe 3, I can see, what does that look like? Turn off, turn on. Yeah, that's a little bit more what I'm looking for maybe, right? So the beauty here is I've got this split, right? So I can go Q mesh, polygroup all, pull, right? And I'm going to say, what do I want done? I want a single polygroup, right? No. I want to actually Q mesh, polygroup it all, and pull it out and change my polygrouping, so I can visually see what's happening there, right? And now I've got a squared piece with a round in the middle. If I was to turn this off and turn, again, that Q grid on, this is what I would end up with, right? So very different approach in different worlds. And I found this handy. The Q grid I lived in when I was building my Gundam hangar, right? So to give you an example here, right? Let me throw this off and let me grab my document here. So if we're going to ZBrush here, okay, you have all the information here that you would want, right? So this is where the store is, but we maybe want to look a little bit more into ZBrush and see what it can do. So here's a lot of stuff about R7, which we're getting into. So I'm going to switch to the gallery and just show you where I would definitely like to have that feature to do a global. So if you look at this, this is all ZModeler, Nanomesh, and Remesh. So you see most of my pieces in this Gundam hangar is really boxy or squared. So I found it very useful that as I was creating, I would keep the Q mesh on, right, at all times, so I can see something blocking out, right? Because when we go into a lower version here, so we go back here and let's get rid of this round piece, right? And just make it be squared again, like that. So I'm going to say I want a little bit smaller of a beveling, right? But now I can start doing, say, Q meshing, right? And it's always going to be nice and blocked, all right? I can get those nice angles maybe I'm looking at and start pulling up a piece that's going to be some kind of bracket that's going in my world, my environment piece, like this, right? And then now I can control, hey, I want to move only the blue ones. So I can do Q mesh, right? And if I do a flat island, it's going to pull the blue and the yellow. So you can see that pulled all those at the same time. If I only want the yellow to not be pulled, I can go flat polygroup and see the yellows don't get touched now, right? So this is just having control, okay, to be able to do all these things. So this is going to lead me into now, finally, an hour and a half later, I think, into get used to it, guys. I love going on tangents because I like to look at what you're asking and make sure we cover it and making sure we do this. So let's look at some of the scaling and look at the ways I did this scale. So all I did was I took this initialized state, which is new to 4R7, and I told it I want to make a cube that's literally only, right, the single faces at every direction, right? So it's 6 faces total. All right, I'm going to re-polygroup this so it's one polygroup. All right, I'm going to turn off dynamic for now, so we're just looking at only this. And what I want to do is create one scale. That's all I'm looking to do. Is I only want one scale here. All right, so the width is no good. So I'm going to use ZModeler to start playing with this. And I'm going to keep this low because, again, my goal here is to use this in Nanomesh or use this in Array. Okay, so we're going to start getting into these features now and get going. So I can now Q-mesh it out, but if I hold that Shift key, I can adjust the scale, right? So I'm going to say, I want it about, that looks good, a little Bob Ross-like, right? Just where am I going with this? Okay, I definitely want to have the shape be a little more like a scale, right? So maybe I'm going to insert a single edge loop this way, and then now I got one here, right? And then I like to use this handy dandy or transpose line to maybe make adjustment here. So I'm just masking off only this point is unmasked, right? So I just masked off that point and inversed it. And now I can move at my heart's content. Okay? So let's take a look what we're having here. Let's actually turn on our dynamic. And you can see it's very boxy. I don't want this. I want this to be round right here. That's my goal. That's what I'm looking for, right? So I'm going to turn off the Q and turn on our handy dandy smooth. Right, so we get something more like this. Okay, and let's go ahead and crease it. Right, and now I'm getting creases everywhere. Right, I'm going to hold those creasings maybe for 3 levels and get something like this. But you can see there's a crease right here. So this is where dynamic is really beautiful to use. Okay, so I'm going to hold down the space bar. I'm going to switch to that crease. I'm going to say single edge. And say I actually don't want that creased. Holding the Alt key, tapping, bingo. So now I'm getting a rounded portion here, right? So if I go back to inserting an edge and I go to a single edge, because this edge exists now, there's actually, if I turn on symmetry, there is symmetry now. Okay? So this point created a symmetry left and right in the x-axis for me. Okay? If I didn't have this, right, I would get that. There is no symmetry left or right because it's just one edge. It's the same across, right? So this is how I will create even symmetry in pieces where I'm like, I need to get some symmetry. Because what I want to do is maybe make it a little bit more round like this and maybe add another loop here. You know what? How about let's just see if I uncrease this. Oh yeah, that's getting better. That's a little bit more of the shape I want. I don't like where this edge is sitting. I'm going to go ahead and go to my slide. And I'm going to say the complete edge loop. And a dynamic subdiv, I can watch it change. Oh, it's been huge for me. You know what? I don't even want this middle one anymore. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe I do want it, right? And maybe what I'm doing here is maybe make it a little bit more rounded like that. Yeah, that looks good. I'm getting there. I definitely want these corners up here to be a little bit more round. So I'm creasing and I'm uncreasing those. All right, so I'm just trying to find a shape for myself that's kind of going to be a scale, like, you know, my dragon scale. All right, I want to actually add some volume here because you can see right now it's very flat. Okay. So again, I'm keeping this low polygon because I'm going to be converting this into a nano and an array mesh. So it's better to stay as low as I can. I don't have to, but I'm going to stay as low as I can. So I'm going to now switch to the insert multiple edges, but I'm going to do interactive multiple edging, right? So I can see it grow and change, right? I'm going to say right about there. That's about what I'm looking for, right? I don't want to have these creased, so I'm going to uncrease these. Right? And I can just simply switch to anything. I could switch to, say, my move brush here, right? And I can, if I want to, I'm in symmetry mode. I can start giving some volume here. And I'm just moving along the normal now, right? And just start giving some little round shape to the scale maybe that I'm looking for. Maybe move these edges a little bit, right? It's a scale, right? Getting a little more organic with it maybe is what I'm looking for, right? Maybe a little roundness up there. Yeah, we're getting something. We're getting something here. Now I want to put a little lip in that scale. Okay? So I'm going to go and switch to the face here, right? Into our ZModeler. And I'm going to say I want you to go along the poly loop. Right? And I'm going to pull this out and I'm going to create new polygroups so I can definitely visually see the differences here, right? So I'm just tapping the Alt key. Right? And then now I'm going to do the same thing here and just pull this loop up. And you got to say it like that. Up. You got to have sound effects. They're mandatory. So I can see this is the scale I'm starting to create. Right? It's very harsh. Right? I don't want that harshness. So I'm going to go to my creasing, right? And I'm going to say the complete edge loop. Okay? I'm going to tell it I don't want that creased, and I can see that getting round now for me. That's more what I'm looking for. And in fact, if I don't want it like that, I want something like that, I can even do this. So this is another benefit of me using the dynamic subdiv, and I'm only at 114 faces. Okay, so what this is now going to lead me to is how I did this is I created a brush, and I'm using low polygon. Okay, so I can start moving this around, right? And again, we can switch to any brush, right? We're very low in polygon, so as I do something like this, I can really get a little more organic with this if I want. Okay, you guys see where I'm hopefully going with this? Now, let's look at, I want to make this into a brush. So for example, creating an insert mesh brush, like Joseph had also covered, I'm just creating it by clicking this button right here. So however this is on the surface, viewed to the camera, that's how it's going to be drawn out. Okay, so I'm going to say brush, create insert mesh, and I'm going to say new. So now I have something like this, right? So I can tile to my heart contents as far as drawing out the same one. Now another little trick that everybody wants to know, and you got to know this, it comes in handy. When I'm dragging out, if I hold the control key, the scale goes to the brush size. So I can every time make this scale be the same size. And the reason why it's disappearing is because I have solo on. So I'll turn that off. So, right? And then now I can, even if I pull away, I can till my heart. All right. I'm back. Woo! Oh boy. So sorry about that. I was adjusting my chair and note to self, fix my cabling. I kind of kicked what you're not supposed to kick below your computer, so I lost my power. So sorry for that. So it took me a minute just to launch everything again. So we're going to get back to where we were, right? Don't worry. We're going to get there. Okay, so I'm just adding again my images because we're looking at what my inspiration was here for creating this brush, right? So again, this is made in ZBrush. So I'm just getting my images back up. So we can get going there. There we go. And we're going to turn off our samplings. All right, so let's get back to, hey, you guys are going to see how to create this scale again. Very exciting. All right, try to hold your excitement level in, would you? So again, I'm just creating a simple cube, right? I'm making it one polygroup, and I'm going to go back into using some ZModeler, right? So, because again, we're going to get to where the questions were coming in, okay? So why I'm keeping this low polygon. Again, holding the shift key is going to adjust, right? So I'm going to keep adding an edge loop here. So we're going to add an edge loop. Instead of doing, again, this single edge like this, I don't know where the middle is. So I want to make sure I switch to multiple edges and then my specific edge and go to one, tap, and now I'm in the middle, right? And now the benefit to this is if I turn symmetry on, you can see that the whole line is white. Okay? You guys, and I know you guys, some people are saying we needed a break anyways. There you go. I gave you guys a break. Single edge loop now, and now I can see this. And now I can put this where I want, right? And then so that's all I was doing, and then we were masking off all the points but this and switching to our move and start, thinking what kind of shape do I actually want here, right? Maybe something like this. Turning on that dynamic subdiv, right? So again, we're in dynamic subdiv. I've got a couple smooths. I'm going to tell it to keep the creasing for 3, right? And we'll go 4. And we'll use the Joseph Drust way of creasing, which is creasing by your tolerance. So again, if I adjust this, right, I will get eventually different creasing. So you see nothing happens when I went over 90, right? But see when I'm in 80, see now these down here didn't get creased. Because that angle, right, that angle that I'm looking at here, right, is less, right, than 88. So that doesn't get creased, right? So, but this still does get creased. Okay, so now I can say, nah, let's uncrease that edge again and get something more like that, right? And then we did, so we can get some volume. We did some multiple edges, and we did an interactive resolution, so I can watch this actually change to, yeah, that looks good. And this is creasing because we already have creased edges here that it's living on. And again, thanks for those that stuck around to see what we were doing. Oh, nice. So I want to continue working with this and fixing this, right? So this is, again, where I wanted to create some volume, right? So I'm in symmetry mode. We're pulling it out. And again, this is now the beauty of the organic part, in essence, of ZBrush. Okay, I'm starting to get a nice volume here for this scale that we're trying to make. And I want now a loop-de-loop here, right? So back to ZModeler and QMesh, and I want to polyloop around. Okay, so I'm not worried about the polygrouping. I can just pull out, and then boom. Again, I'm tapping that Alt key to change things, right? And you can see this is being creased because that edge I'm pulling from is also creased, and that's definitely maybe what I want right now. And then we're going to pull up here, yes, and create that little lip again. So I definitely don't want that sharpness happening, right? It's looking a little robotic. So again, I'm over the edge. I'm clicking on that crease option. I'm doing a complete edge loop. And now, if you hold that Alt key, boom, we're smoothing it. And this is maybe more what I'm looking for. Okay? So now let's look at how I can array this and maybe manipulate and move this around a little bit. So I've got a great start to what I'm trying to create. Let's maybe put a little bit more bend in it. It's an organic shape, but even though I'm low polygons, this is another reason why I'm staying low, is I can make some big, huge adjustments. All right, so I'm going to give it some more volume here in the middle. I'm using the Alt key with the move and just moving this, again, holding Alt, pulling out, creating some nice volume in there. All right, so I'm going to open up my handy-dandy Remesh here, okay, and I'm going to turn the floor on just so you guys can see this. All right, and I'm going to make this brighter for you by going in the draw, okay, and at the very bottom there's a modifiers, and I'm just going to up this so you guys can really see those lines coming through, right? So that red, blue, and green, right? I'm going to throw my array mesh on now, and I'm going to say, you know what, to start, maybe I want 16 copies of this. So it looks like nothing's really happening. But they're sitting right now all on top of each other, and what I want them to do is kind of rotate around, right? So I'm turning this on because this green, like most programs, green is your y-axis, red is your x-axis, and blue is your z-axis, right? So I'm going to go to rotate here, and I'm going to say along the y, how much do I want? I'm going to say 360 degrees, and then now you can see what happens. Okay, so I can now start saying, switching even to something like a transpose, right? And I can start moving, see, this around, right? And you can see it's just moving them as a group in essence, okay? What I want to do is actually lock the position and lock the size, right? So when I move, they're now moving as a piece individually, right? So now I'm moving this, and now I'm seeing that nice look that maybe, how do I want them to sit in space? Maybe a little something like that. That's nice, right? Mind you, again, I'm turning polyframe on. This is an instance. So I'm actually only working again on the one mesh. It's 114 polygons. Okay? So I don't drink coffee, if someone's asking that. I don't do it. I don't drink coffee. I don't have caffeine, people. I don't even drink soda. I'm high on life and ZBrush, people. That's what we're doing here. Okay, so the benefit to this now is scales have an overlapping. Oh, the wife brought you pizza, James. That's awesome. All right, so the wife has scales have overlapping to them, right? So I need to create another instance of this, okay? So what I'm going to do is tell ZBrush, hey, let's insert or append. It doesn't really matter at this point because right now I only have one array mesh happening. Okay, so I'm going to say append new. Right, so it looks like, again, nothing's happening. But what we've done now is we've created an instance now of the whole rotated part. So watch this. If I now turn on this transpose option, you can see the transpose line changes. Okay, this now has a yellow circle dead center there. Okay, I'm going to turn off this so you guys can really see it now. There's a yellow circle, and you can see at the top here there's a stage 2 and repeat. Right? So there's a number of repeats in the stage 2. That's the same thing as going here to repeat and then the staging that you want. So what I'm going to do now is tell ZBrush in the move mode, which I'm using the W, and because, the key point here, because I clicked on the transpose, I'm going to pull this up, and oh yeah, we've got a duplicate of the whole thing. Again though, the key thing here is we're doing instances, so I still only have 114 faces. So now I know I want to rotate, and because this is sitting dead center, I can actually switch to rotate of the transpose. Because I have that transpose option now on, I can actually rotate and look from this, and you can see I'm rotating the surface. So I can see stuff like this, and I'm rotating that overlapping that I want. Right? So how much overlap do I want? And you can see right here the Z amount. See that? It's rotating. Right? So you see that slider's actually adjusting as I do my own rotation from above. And maybe this is really what I'm looking for, right? So if you look at this, we're getting a very nice result now of those scales. But this is great. This is the fun part of array mesh, and this is why I really, really dig it and have some fun. I'm going to show you another way why I like using the array mesh. Okay? I want to now go adjust this. You can see the overlapping maybe I don't like. I can simply just switch to move, right? And then start adjusting, and look, I'm seeing them all adjust together. So I can start creating completely different look scale maybe that I want to have, and I'm watching it. So artistically, I'm really controlling what I want to have happen to these scales. So in essence, I'm controlling that overlapping that's really happening to these scales, which is going to create a completely different look, and I'm seeing them all happen at the same time, right? So here's how I created now the body, right, and these legs. It was really simple for me, okay? I grabbed this and said, I like what I have here, okay? I definitely want to convert this now into geometry. Okay, so there's two ways we can do this in the array mesh, okay? We can either go down to the lower stage, and you can see make mesh comes alive. Although, so notice, when you switch to a stage, we show you the other stage, okay, in like a transparent dotted look. So this is just showing you, hey, that stage 2, that's making all of stage 2. If I switch, see, stage 1 is all that bottom row. This will never go transparent because that's the one piece we're using to create this. Okay, so I can either go to each stage and just here click make mesh, and we'll make it real geometry, right? And you can see dynamic off, it updates live, dynamic on, and all the pieces are having this update. So I can either do this, make to mesh, or if you guys want to make your life a little bit easier, we can go to geometry here and do convert BPR to geo, and bingo, we now have all of our array mesh is now geometry, and look, all of our polygrouping is also maintained, right? So this is a way we can create. But because I just did an undo, I have this, there is nothing stopping me for deciding, you know what? Let's add another insert edge, maybe a single one right here, right? And I'm going to go to the low version and say, you know what? Let's add another little edge, maybe right here, right? And then now watch this. We can now pull, right? If I Q mesh, just so you can see it, we'll do a single. I can pull on that, and now it's matching to there, and then now I can pull on that, right? And if I want to, I can solo out. If I want to, I can turn off my array and say, let's pull on that. And then now see what that looks like smooth. I've created a very different look, but now I have still my arrays there, and I've got it. And so the beauty of this, everyone, right? I can save this out, and anytime I want to redo this with anything, I'm good to go, right? So there's this process for me was just like, oh, artistically, I can really push my elements. I can see where my design's going live. And I'm going to show you another way that array mesh gives you that idea of going live, okay? So let's go ahead and convert this into real geo, all right? So I'm going to convert the BPR to geo. We've got this beautiful scaling happening. I'm going to tell ZBrush B, create an insert mesh brush. It's asking me, yo, Paul, what you doing? Do you want a new one, or do you want to append to an existing one? Well, I want a new one. Let's start fresh. Boom, right? I got a new one. You can see my icon up there is totally new. So now I can draw out. I'm getting multiple ones of these. Forget this. Let's get real creative with this, all right? I'm going to turn off symmetry just so we can look at just having only one of these draw out. But what I'm going to do, okay, is I'm going to turn on this curve mode. Right? And I'm going to switch to a plane because this is exactly how I did this guy. Like, there's no difference here. I'm going to make this plane a poly mesh. So we have a physical piece of geometry. And now I can draw out and do stuff like this. So I'm on a curve that I can start manipulating and moving around. Oh, yes! Right? So I can draw, if you go this way, you see I'm going this way, see the direction of the scales and the way they're going? What if maybe I want to go another way as well, the opposite direction, right? So I'm going this way, right? So see, now I can draw that way as well. And the scales are always going the direction that I started the stroke in this sense. So there's some things we need to fix here, okay? And I'm not pleased with how they're kind of working. And then look into my eyes. Look into my ZBrush eyes. You want to make scales now. Okay, enough of that. So this is why I'm making this low polygon, because I'm going to be building something where it's long, and I don't want millions of polygons. I want to keep it low. See, I'm already at 212,000, which is still not much for ZBrush world. So the gap here isn't quite right. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dock the stroke palette over here in our tray because I want to play with some things for you. Okay? So this curve step is saying how it steps out when I'm drawing out. Okay? So I'm going to say, how about let's not go so much. Let's go a 0.8 step, and all I have to do is tap on the curve, and you see we get an update. That is looking pretty perfect. Right, so here I'm going to pull away, and let's make this go very straight. Right, and is this what I want? Is this what I'm looking for? Right, it's getting better, but it's not exactly what I want. I want a little bit more overlapping. So here, maybe let's try 0.7, right? And again, because the curve's still there, I just tap, and everything updates. That's more like what I'm looking for. I want that nice scale, right? So think about it. I can turn this into anything. Right? Very handy, very useful stuff. Okay, so now we have one more problem to solve here, and it's when we start bending a little bit, right? And you can see I'm jumping on the plane. See, it snaps to the plane, right? And when I start bending this, we start getting these things happening on the bend. So when it's kind of straight, we're getting definitely what we want. Okay. So what I'm going to tell ZBrush to do is, hey, so what you got to think of, okay, the stroke, let me explain. Let me rewind. Rewind. Okay, You got to think of the curve is how the stroke's being applied. So we're used to clay and sculptural, right? I'm using a Remesh to get to this point. The stroke or that curve is how I'm applying those scales. So that's going to live in the stroke menu. The mesh itself is actually the tool that we've converted into a brush, right? If you remember, we started with this. So it was actually a tool, and we told it, hey, ZBrush, I want you to convert this actually into a brush, this piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the brush palette, okay? And I'm going to go in the modifiers, and we got some things here we can play with. All right, the two sliders that I want to focus on right now is my curve res, okay, and my angle here. So watch this. If I just up this curve res to even something like even 3 really low, and I come and click on this, oh, smack dab. Now we're talking. This is what I'm looking for, right? This is what I wanted, right? So let's think about it. Let's get rid of this. Let's look at just the plane again, and let's delete what we had. So I'm going to do a delete hidden, okay? And I'm going to delete the curve right here with our delete curve function. Okay, so now all I did was like, I kind of want to have this shape happening, right? So I just started just saying along a plane, drawing that out, right? And then I can adjust the size of this, okay? I'm going to change my draw size, and then I can tap on that curve and see it just made it bigger automatically for me. So then here's some more fun stuff I get to do here. So because I'm drawing on a plane, it's staying at all perfect in that same exact plane. Okay? So right now I have a bend and a snap mode on. So I'm telling ZBrush, hey, I can bend the curve. So take note that when I'm not hovering over that curve, my draw or my brush size, okay, it's a red icon, right? And it's a certain size. When I head over the curve, do you see how it changes to like an aqua color? Because that's me, well, knowing that I can actually adjust the curve now, okay? So red means make the curve in essence. The aqua blue means I can actually start adjusting the curve and playing with it and pulling it off and doing what I want. Now what's happening here is I pull this, everything's pulling, right? So it's trying to snap as well. So that's what this snap option is doing. It's trying to continually to snap to that plane is what it's trying to do, right? So I can turn off the snap and start having it not snap to the plane anymore, right? And now I will get a little bit different result happening where that snap's not happening, okay? But if you also notice, when I start moving this, see the whole thing's moving? See, like, look at the top. See, it's all moving, right? I want to make sure, you know what, I kind of like where this is. I'm loving this feel. I definitely want to fix this. But when I start pulling on this, I don't want that top to keep moving, right? So what I'm going to do, and I'm just undoing, so you guys, we're going backwards and forwards here. Okay, so I'm going to turn on lock start and lock end. Okay? And what that's going to allow me to do is, in essence, lock the end and the start of my curve. So if I'm to start pulling on this, you can see that top part, it's staying very stationary. Right? So I could find the bends that I want, and now the curve is going to act just a bit different. Okay? And then how do I want it to overlap on itself, as far as how I want some overlapping to happen? That's going to live again in our brush palette. So that's where this slider comes in. That max bend angle, okay, is going to allow me, hey, what's the angle? Because what if I'm doing something that's a rope, right? A rope can definitely bend right on top of itself. This, I don't want it to bend on itself, so I want to limit how much it can actually bend. So the higher I go, 90 degrees means it can bend 90 degrees. If I go lower, if I put it something at like 15 degrees, that means it's only going to be 15 degree bend. So see, it's limited. Right? See, I can only bend it over on top of itself so much, which makes more sense for this brush and what I'm doing for trying to make this replicate this dragon piece, right? So I would probably want to find my right bend angle. You know, maybe I only want 5 degrees of bending, and see, it's very limited. So as I pull, it's starting to look more like snake-like and bend-like, what you would have in real life. Okay, so I'm adjusting these options, and now bingo or bam, which I guess bingo is becoming my trademark here on Twitch apparently. I have polygrouping. I've got everything I want. So even though this is now drawn out, let's take this another level, right? If I split this unmasked points, I've got just this guy. And because I've kept this polygrouping, right, I can look at this smoothed like so. So now this is what it looks like smoothed. But because these are all the same, there is nothing stopping me from switching to ZModeler, right? And I'm going to turn on the polyframe so you guys really get the idea here also. Holding that space bar and saying QMesh, polygroup all, and now every single scale is going to QMesh out, right? Because I'm telling it to do polygroup all. Okay? So this is another reason why I'm trying to keep everything very low, is I want to be playing with this option. Okay, so besides just doing that, I maybe want to do a little something else, and maybe there's already an existing surface that I want to put this on. Okay, so maybe it is a cylinder that already exists and something that I want. Okay, so I want to show you guys how now I can use even Nanomesh to kind of do this same scaling thing that we're doing here. All right, and then move into creating an alpha for this stuff as well. Okay, so now we're good. So I'm just talking a lot now. So you'll see the results of what I got from doing just polygroup all. You see I'm making a new polygroup and it's good to go. So I want to look at a different approach to this though. Okay, so I want to look more at a Nanomesh approach definitely to this. So I'm going to switch to my subtools here. Oh. Maybe I did. I clicked 3 times. User error. Okay, let me launch this. And I have this loaded already. Sorry, I clicked multiple times. That was my fault. I got happy. I'm going to load our scale. Okay, so looking at a scale again, right? So we have this guy here, right? So instead of doing that where I'm doing a Remesh to make it, how about what if I already have an existing surface? So let's keep this simple again. So I'm going to import just a cylinder that I have that I'm going to use multiple times here. So I got a cylinder here, okay? And we've got faces all over the place, right? So I want to give you the concept here where Nanomesh came, okay? So I have a scale here. I can go to something, say, like geometry, modify topology, and you see this micro mesh right here? I can actually click on that, and then ZBrush is saying, okay, what tool do you want to put on every single face? So I'm going to say put the scale. And it's telling you, hey, you got to draw this on. Okay. Now what? What happens? Well, I got to go to render. Okay. Render properties and draw micro mesh. Okay. So I'm going to turn off polyframe. And if I render, you're going to see what we get. So what's happening is this scale is replacing every single piece of geometry, but it's also looking at the polygon piece itself, right? So right now it's kind of tiny. So maybe I want to go back to the original scale and say, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and unify this in my deformation, right? So it's just bigger. Okay. I'm going to go back to this cylinder and I'm going to click off micro mesh, turn it back on and grab that scale. And then now when I render, I'll get bigger scales. Right? So you guys can all see what I'm doing here, right? Everyone's getting the general idea. Okay, so what you have though with the micro mesh and what things will happen is looking at the top, where the polygons, are being stretched, or they're triangles or anything like that. Okay? I don't want that. That's definitely not what I want. So this is where Nanomesh came into play. So Nanomesh is a combination of what I just did using a Remesh to make an insert mesh brush, but what I want to do is turn the insert mesh brush into a nano. Okay? So I'm going to be going for a little bit more here because we also have Lana, who's in New Zealand. So this channel is going to be as live 24/7 as much as we can, and it's in multiple time zones. So we have Lana in New Zealand coming up today. She's going to be at 3:30 Pacific time. All times will be Pacific time because that's where we're located. All right? And our new podcast is also going to be launching today in the live. The High Horse Entertainment podcast is going to be live today for you. So let's get to this. Forget this. I don't want to do this. I just want to take this guy, right? Keep it low polygon. So I'm at 82 faces. This is how I want to draw it out. So again, I'm going to hit B, and I'm going to say create insert mesh brush. I'm going to say give me a new. Give me a new, all right? So now I can just draw these out, right? And of course, if I'm in symmetry mode, I draw them out, and because now I'm looking at dynamic subdiv, I see it smooth. Pretty cool, right? What I'm going to change up now is I'm going to say now hit the B and hit create nanomesh. Okay, so now you can see it switches to the ZModeler brush, right? And I've, in essence, created a custom ZModeler brush. So let's go back to this cylinder now, okay? And if I look at this, and I say, oh, I can draw out one here, I can draw out one here, and we'll only look at this, right? Okay, so the micro mesh is turning on because I keep updating this, right? So I'm now drawing one scale at a time. And you can see there's multiple polygroups there, right? So you guys should now know, okay, is thinking about this, how about I just go insert nano and I say polygroup all. And now I can say, well, do I want like that? Is that what I'm really looking for? Something like this, right? So if I turn this off and we now go to nano, right? And I smoothing, right? Looking at this, this is what I'm getting, right? So I'm now getting a nano that is going across. And you can see my polygon count really hasn't escalated, right? So I can say edit mesh and say, what does that look like? Smooth on edit mesh, right? And I can start seeing things. This is going to come in very handy. So watch this. We can say, maybe it's a little too big, or maybe I need to go bigger. I want to maybe make the length a little bit longer. And let's also offset it a little bit more, or maybe less. So even though after it's drawn out the fact, I can sit here and do whatever I want, right? And go crazy. I can add some rotation to it. Maybe put a little rotation there. Put a little X rotation so I can start having something like this, right? And then I can really start creating a very unique shape. So this, think about it also in this sense, okay? Let me grab a plane here just so we can visually, again, get a representation of this. So all I'm doing is I'm telling ZBrush, draw a scale, right? And all polygons. No matter where you are, put a scale. And if I don't have to worry about is it drawn out right or not, because nano, I'm going to be able to do that, right? So what I can do is say, no, not all polygroup. How about just a single polygroup? So I can make this, I can make this, I can make this. Okay, so now I want you guys to remember some stuff that I'm doing. So right now I have 1, 2, 3 nano right? So I can say, you know what, this one, let's edit this one. And I'm going to say, let's Q mesh this out and maybe do something like this and something like this. Yeah, I like that, right? And see, look, they're all getting that adjustment because it's the same mesh, right? I'm editing that mesh. Okay, but this is also what's very cool and what I enjoyed, what I was trying to show you. Okay. So I'm going to go and draw out that Alt key, right, to temporarily draw. And see, nothing's happening, right? If I go look at, say, this green polygroup, just looking at this, right? This is, again, where that wonderful hold the Alt, grab that green, hold the Shift to copy. Now watch this. I am now painting wherever I want those scales. So you got to think about this. This is for anything, flowers, roses, right? And then now I can adjust those sizes. I can adjust those offsets however I want. Maybe the Y's a little bit, maybe the Z, have it sitting on top of the surface. So I use this option so much. So this is all just instancing across the board. Okay, so re-looking at my dragon piece here. So let me import the pieces again. Let me bring that image again, and I'm going to put it in Spotlight. Right? Thinking about this, you could have, besides doing the brush I made, you could have just already had the piece drawn out, and now you could just use Nano to place it where you want to. Continue to update it and things like this. But if you remember, when we first started hours ago, I told you that Mr. Joseph Drust had made a very handy dandy plugin, okay, on ZBrush Central that is giving a great way to combine these two features. Okay, so I have, say, something like in here in our Z script. So this is where our community all comes together to share things. Very helpful. Think about what we're doing right now together. This is what the community is doing on this page all the time. So if you're not a member now, get your members only jacket. Get in here. All right, become a member. Okay, so right here in the ZScript Utilities forum, I'm going to click on this. All right, and this is where artists will create their own and build their own. Like the Z Builder, this is pretty amazing, done by an artist. There's Z Trees, which you can create trees. But what I really want to show you guys is what Drust made was he did Nanotile, this. Okay, so you can download this yourself here. Okay, this is going to give us the capability to combine now the Remesh and Nanomesh and create tileable textures, normal maps, height maps, AOs, anything I want. So I want to briefly touch on this because we are running out of time. Because I don't want to run into Lana's time, and my stomach's starting to growl, I'll be honest with you. It's getting hungry. So I'm going to go ahead and let's take a look at Drust's handy dandy little plugin here. So I got it in my plugins. I'm just going to dock this over, okay? And I'm going to open up the Nanotile, okay? So this is what Drust has made. So really simple. I want to have a plane that has 6 divisions on it, okay? I want a map size that's 1K, 1024 by 1024. I don't want BPR, and I don't want normals, but I'll definitely take a height map because I want to create an alpha, okay? If I wanted color, I would have albedo on as well. So you can see all the things you can create here, right? And I can create a bump as well. So I'm just going to say, give me a height map. All right, and I'm going to tell ZBrush create a new tileable tool. And what he's done here is he's made it so you guys will have a clean plane here to start working with. Okay, so if now I have something like this, right, where I want to go back to that tileable or that nano piece. So if I'm inserting a nano and I want to start making these like this, okay, I can start doing some fun with this. So he's right now using a Remesh with Nanomesh in essence. So we're combining these two options. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I know I want them to kind of offset, right? I want some offsetting to happen there. So I'm going to actually switch to the polygrouping and say polyloop, right? And I'm going to say I want that, and that to be new polygroups, right? Because this is what I'm looking for, right? I want to have different polygrouping. All right. Then I'm going to say, all right, I want to now switch back to my insert, my nano, and I want to say polygroup all. So wherever that polygroup is, okay, that's where I'm going to start now getting the scales. And I don't need to be perfect, right? Because what can we do? We can go to nano now. There is my nano. I can say, is that the size I want? Yeah, that's pretty good size. Is this the rotation? Yeah, let's put a little rotation in there maybe. Let's go ahead and maybe have some offset in the Z a little bit. Maybe something like that. Maybe you want to even rotate another direction as well, maybe a little bit rotate in the X, maybe something like that, right? So I'm now creating something very nice to pull from, right? So remember, we made alternating polygroups here, right? So I'm going to say, let's copy this nano, and I'm still in insert nano polygroup all, and I'm going to click and drag this out, right? And I'm going to paste. Now I get the exact same nano, right? Because I copied from index 0. I told it copy that index, and then now I put it on the second index that I made. But now maybe what I want to do is have a little bit different offset. And looking at this, I can say, you know what, the size, I'm not feeling the size. So let's play a little bit of the size. Maybe I'll go 0.8 in the size. Okay, and then go back to index 0, and I say I definitely want that also at 0.8 so they stay consistent. So now you can see what I'm doing here. I'm creating something that is tileable, right? So I have a nice tileable surface happening, right? And again, I can edit the mesh however I want, right? I can sit here and do whatever I want to this mesh and continue to add it by hitting edit mesh. So we're starting to get a nice result. So now all I have to do, okay, is tell ZBrush, you know what I want here? I want you to create a seamless maps. Okay, and now it's asking me, where do you want to save this? So I'm just going to click save. I'm just going to put it on my desktop real quick. Call that scales. Drust is going to do all the work for us, right? So if I go back to a plane, and now let's think sculpturally again, okay? I'm going back now, and we'll divide this up now and have some sculptural element. And I'm going to switch to the standard brush, okay? And now what I want to tell ZBrush is I'm going to do a drag rec, and I'm going to grab that alpha that we just made. And you can see we're now getting that alpha that's tiling the way we want it. Okay? Now the beauty here is we're doing sculptural stuff. So I can maybe change my focal shift and have the consistent thing across. Right? So as I draw this out, I'm getting all those scales. Okay? I can even, here in the alpha, I can go to modify and I can tile the alpha itself. I can say tile even that 2 more times. Right? I can keep tiling this if I want to. Okay? But what I also want to do is maybe instead of doing what we did here, right, where we had these micro mesh happening. Okay, so I'm going to turn this off. Okay, and then get rid of also the nanos. So I had the nanos on here as well. So we don't need these nanos. And what I want to do instead is use something more like maybe surface noise. Okay, so you can see it's polygrouped off. So I'm going to go in the noise. And this is going to allow me now, I can have a combination of noises. Right? So right now, the noise is using this graph below. And I can make it be stronger, right? And make the strength be stronger. And I can start really creating a different type of noise here. What I want to have happen is I want to now grab that image that I made inside of ZBrush, right? Okay, and I want to say grab that image, okay? And I'm going to say, let's grab this image, and here we have that. And then now we have a scale slider here, right, for this. And I also have a scale slider for the alpha. So I can start tiling that across here as well. Okay, so if I bump the strength up, I am now doing a combination of both, right? I'm telling it to mix between the two, right? So this little mix slider right here is telling mix this with this. And then these buttons right here are telling how does it mix, right? So minimum difference. So if you look, if we get in a little bit closer here, you can start seeing that mixture. See if I start bumping, see one starts being more powerful than the other, right? And then I can do a minimum. So it's really only happening on the edges here, and I can do a max, right? So this edge right here is now not being touched. It's only inside the scale that's being touched. But not only that, I can tell it to wrap around based upon UVs, right? Because this particular piece has UVs. And then now I'm just so big in scale, right? So I need to dial this back, right? And now you can see these are tiling, right? And then same thing with this. If I dial this back, it won't be so strong, right? So now you can have tileable things like this. So anytime I want an image, I click here, I go grab another image. So here's another one that I made. It's just these tileable pieces, round pieces, right? And it's working nice and seamless because of the UV option. If I don't want to have this be a part of it, I can turn this off. So I'm going to have different types of tiling. And when I say okay, this is what we have, right? So we got something nice and tileable. Okay, now I'm pretty low in polygon. So if I render, ZBrush is going to now render what the result of this surface noise would look like if it was applied. So this is what would happen if it was actually applied, right? And then of course I can tell ZBrush, you know what? I don't want it on the top parts. And I'm going to hide that mask and Shift R, and let's see what that looks like. Again, I'm just doing a render state where I'm telling it to render out, and I'm doing a Shift R there, and then there you go. So I can even blend that. So what's nice though is you've decided as a user, again, I'm going to say, you know what, let's go ahead and crease by polygroups, right? So we're creasing the cap here, the bottom. And if I divide, right, I'm getting more geometry, right? So I'm at 409,000, 1.6 million, right? So we're getting the top and the bottom, right? Everything around, okay? And all I really care about is this piece. This is all I really care about. So if you look at this, this is surface noise. That's actually not being applied to the surface yet. So by me subdividing up, I can really make sure this, when this does apply, I get the result I'm looking at right here. Okay, when I go to render. Here, let's make these not so repetitive. Let's scale this up a lot more so you can really see what's happening in here. Okay, so here I'll render that again. Again, this is the same thing, kind of like the theme I was going here with Nanomesh and Array Mesh. I don't have to divide up, and I can get results and see what this is going to look like. Now, I like it, and now I need it applied to the surface. Okay? So instead of me just clicking this applied on mesh, I'm going to ask ZBrush mask by the noise. So now I have the noise itself as a mask, right? So I can inverse this if I want, right? And I can really play with this and go, all right, I want to actually now go to deformation instead, and I'm going to go to this little handy dandy inflate, and I can inflate inward, and I can inflate outward, and I can keep pushing and pushing and pushing this. So it's to whatever I want to do, right? So if I don't like that, I can inverse it and say, what does it look like this way? Right? So I can either use the surface noise as a mask, like I'm doing it here, right? So if I clear the mask and I turn that noise back on, this is the same thing if I go into edit and I'm really looking at this, right? By me adjusting the strength from a negative to a positive, that's the same thing as me flipping the mask. Okay, so now it's just I'm looking at it surface noise wise, right? And then I can render that out. And again, I don't need to have a ton of polygons. All right, I think that's going to have to be it for my part because I want to free up the channel. Lana, again, is going to be logging in here. So don't go anywhere because she starts in 45 minutes. You're going to want to go, again, onto ZBrush Live portion. So let me show you that page again so you guys can see that. And that's where all these streams will be happening for you. And then the program is happening. So this is where we are. So there's my streaming happening. So again, this is where we're going to be posting everything when it comes down to ZBrush Summit. all of these live Twitch feeds, whether it be the Z plays, whether it be any of the podcasts, whether it be any videos that we have involved in here. You can see also there'll be links to videos that we're putting up. This is that Ask ZBrush segment that Joseph's been working on a lot, right? There's the new post from the team at Blizzard showing all the Overwatch characters on ZBrush Central. So ZBrush Live has become one central hub. Okay, the new podcast is also up for the High Horse Entertainment. That is now live. And don't forget about the YouTube channel, right? So we have our own YouTube channel that the podcast, if you don't want to go to Apple, you guys can just go to our YouTube channel here and you can get the live feed, because we actually record in video our podcast. You can see it right here, right now. So this is also where you want to come and see videos, tutorials as well. But again, all this stuff is going to link back to the main ZBrush Live page. And of course, we're going to have an amazing set of artists jumping on this. If you want to be a member and be streaming yourself too, we are looking for artists to continually to host. So you can contact us and we'll be happy to look at your work, see if your Twitch channel, and see if you want to be streaming right on our ZBrush Live channel itself. So before I go ahead and close this stream, is there anything, last questions I missed in the chat real quick? Go ahead, throw them up. Okay, Motions and Bodies, the Bodies in Motion from Scott Eaton is absolutely out. He launched that page this month. I'm sorry, last month. It's February now. Gotta get my months together here. Okay, so guys, this channel is going to be live all the time. So if you're on the Twitch channel right now, you can see a schedule. We got Michael Popovich tomorrow. We got John Troy Nickel going tomorrow. We got Ashley Adams on Wednesday. We got Brendan, Isaiah Bengstone going on Thursday. Timothy Raps on also Thursday. Matt Thorup is on Thursday. Danny Max on Friday. And I'm sure Joseph and I will sprinkle a little bit of our wonderful, chaotic, my bad jokes, his whatever. So really appreciate you guys logging in today for the launch. We've had a blast. We're going to be continuing this, obviously. This has now become a live, fun channel for all of us to communicate, learn, and share ideas, learn about ZBrush, become an artistic team together. So thank you again for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Again, don't go far. Lana is coming live from New Zealand. She does amazing work, a lot of character work. She'll be alive in literally 45 minutes. Okay? So have a wonderful evening from me here at the Pixelogic office. Joseph in his little cave in the Pixelogic office. So have a great evening. Thanks for tuning in. All the best. Happy ZBrushing.